But yeah, jazakallah for making your time on your Saturday, man.
No problem. I mean, and more than happy to, inshallah ta'ala. I'm just bear with me. I'm just going to switch my light on so that you can. Uh,
You're good, man. Yeah.
Apologies.
Um,
The weather here is actually quite good today. So, inshallah ta'ala, I was actually thinking of not putting the light on, but it is a little bit dark in this room. I'm just going to share my screen, and inshallah ta'ala, we should get the ball rolling, inshallah ta'ala. Um, so just bear with me one moment. Bismillah. So I'm just going to send a request there, Sheikh, if you just want to validate the request, if you're able to.
sorry, I'm here.
No problem also. And feel free, Sheikh, if you need to at any point, pop out, etc. Because I know I do the same sometimes. So don't worry at all.
There's another class having
Yeah,
technical
yeah, yeah,
issues. I'll be
absolutely,
back in two
absolutely.
minutes, inshallah.
Yeah, you do your thing, inshallah, Sheikh.
All right.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala Rasul karim ma ba'd. I'm very happy to be with you all, inshallah ta'ala, today. And we're going to start off with a quick presentation, two presentations, and then inshallah ta'ala, I'm just going to explain to you the development of the madhab throughout the generations of the history of Islam, so to speak. So let's start off with a little bit about the importance of Kufa. So no discussion on the Hanafi madhab can begin without a discussion on Kufa. Kufa is going to be our ultimate starting point, and really, you cannot be discussing Abu Hanifa or any of his teachers without first understanding the importance of Kufa. Now, in my Hanafi book, An Introduction to the Hanafi Madhab, Volume 1, I've got a detailed discussion on the importance of Kufa, and I think it's just important for us to just kind of just recap some of the history. So obviously, we know that the Muslim conquest of Iraq begins from as early as about 14 Hijri, if not earlier, some would say, 12 Hijri as well, some would place it at. And you could say the Battle of Hira in around about 12 Hijri. Again, my I've got it all in the book, and I don't want to go into just reading directly off the book, because the most important date is obviously the 17th of Hijri. The 17th year was or the 16th year of Hijrah, 17 or 16, depending on the different interpretations. So the Muslims are making their way into Iraq. And as they're making their way into Iraq, they're conquering Hira. Then they conquer a place very close to Kufa, or you could say Kufa itself. I don't mind the person just saying Hira is very close to Kufa in any way, in any case, anyway. Then the very, very famous the Battle of Qadisiyah, and then finally you've got the Battle of what we refer to as Fathul Mada'in, sometimes referred to as Ctesiphon. And that was the kind of like the end, not the end of the Persian Empire, so to speak, but at this point now, the Persian Emperor, he's on the run, and then in the end, he's murdered by one of his own people, etc. In our main point here is this idea that when Umar radiallahu anhu conquers Iraq at the hands of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu, he creates what we call a garrison city. So this is something Umar radiallahu anhu was concerned with. And there's a really nice book by, I think, Zamil, Jafir Zamil or something like that, called The Islamic City. The Islamic City. I'll try to send the PDF, inshallah ta'ala. So in this book, he speaks about what we refer to as garrison cities. The garrison cities are essentially the Al-Amsar. Al-Amsar is the name given to it in Arabic, which is Umar radiallahu anhu was very concerned that if I let these new conquering Sahaba essentially just mingle with the new conquered territories, firstly, we lose our military. Our military is kind of just like just super part of the people. And this was never in the history of Islam, it was never ever really like this. It's like this in the modern nation state where the military is a part of the people. So the people or the military, you enlist yourself for the military. And Halak speaks about this. I don't want to digress, obviously, in the Impossible State and other books of his, where this was unheard of in the history of Islam, really, where the military is a part of the people. So the subjects are sacrificing themselves for the nation. Usually, what used to happen in the history of Islam is the military was separate from the people. So the people were generally just subjects or like people who were just under Islamic governance, and the military would be kept separate. And this is exactly how Umar radiallahu anhu wanted it as well, that the new Sahaba should not, the Sahaba who have taken part in this conquest, he doesn't want them just totally mixing with the community to the level wherein they lose their identity as Muslims. And this can happen. Remember, they're conquering a territory which is probably something which they'd never ever expected, which not probably, we know 100% the Arabs never expected. They expected the opposite, probably, which is to be consumed by maybe one of these two empires, either the Roman Empire or the Persian Empire. And they had the Romans and Persians had lots of, you could say, vassal states. We know that the Byzantines had the Ghassanids on the eastern side, and we know that the Persians had the Lakhmids, and there's constant battles and stuff happening between them. So when in the battle of Khandaq, the Prophet ﷺ promised that أعطيت مفاتيح مصر أعطيت مفاتيح فارس, that I have been given the keys of Persia. This was definitely something that would have shocked the Sahaba. But even then, they said, Amanna wa Saddaqna. They straight away they accepted what Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, and 100% that is what happened. They conquered Iraq. Now, Umar radiallahu anhu creates a city by the name of Kufa. He also creates a city by the name of Basra, and all of these cities later are created, which we refer to as the Amsar, the garrison cities. There's a lot of benefit around these garrison cities, right? And I've touched on one of them, which is that it keeps the Sahaba concentrated in one area. And then another benefit is that these Sahaba can then launch raids into further territories, because they from one place. So Kufa becomes like a launch pad to launch invasions into other parts of the world. So this is the benefit of having a garrison city, and this is essentially what Kufa was. And so now, as that doesn't mean there are people in Kufa who are basically from Medina Munawwara only. No, there are still new people there. And so now Umar radiallahu anhu needs to send a few Sahaba who are going to teach the people of Kufa ilm. He's created a city. Most of the, you could say, Sahaba are going to be residing in there. And not just in Kufa, in Iraq in general, but Kufa will have a concentration of, you could say, senior Sahaba who took part in the conquest. They will be residing in Kufa. And so Umar radiallahu anhu, even though his practice was that he preferred to keep Sahaba that are the Sahaba who were the mujtahideen from amongst the Sahaba, those who had a deep, deep understanding of the message of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they had a deep understanding of the objectives of Sharia, he preferred to keep them in Medina Munawwara. He makes an exception when it comes to Kufa. And he sends one individual who really, Umar radiallahu anhu loved him. And he wanted to keep him in Medina Munawwara, but he gives preference to the people of Kufa with regards to this individual, and that was Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So Umar radiallahu anhu generally not allow the learned Sahaba to leave Medina Munawwara except in rare instances. And Kufa was one of those rare exceptions. So he sends Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu to the people of Kufa, and he sends a letter to the people of Kufa. And he says, and this is narrated by Imam Ahmad in his Fada'il al-Sahaba, and Imam al-Bayhaqi also quotes it in his Al-Madkhal ila Kitab al-Sunan. Umar radiallahu anhu writes to the people of Kufa, and he says, إني قد بعثت إليكم عمار بن ياسر أميرا وعبد الله بن مسعود معلما ووزيرا وإنهما من النجباء من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من أصحاب بدر وقد جعلت عبد الله بن مسعود على بيت مالكم فتعلموا منهما واقتدوا بهما وقد آثرتكم بعبد الله بن مسعود على نفسي. He says, I'm sending Ammar ibn Yasir as your leader and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud who will be your teacher. And they are the most, you could say, distinct companions of the Prophet ﷺ. They are from those who participated in the Battle of Badr. And I am making Abdullah ibn Mas'ud in charge of your treasury. Learn from him, follow them, and I'm giving you people preference with regards to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud over my own self. I would have loved to have preferred, I would have preferred to have kept Abdullah ibn Mas'ud here in Medina Munawwara with me, because I like to consult the Sahaba, and the best way to consult the Sahaba would obviously be to keep them close to you in Medina Munawwara. So it's easy to consult them. You just gather them all and just have a consultation. If they all spread out in different lands, how are you going to combine and bring all of them together? And that is why a lot of the scholars actually believe in this idea that an ijma' was more like a consensus. A consensus of the Sahaba was more likely to occur during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, because both of them seem to have had this policy wherein they did not prefer Sahaba to fully settle outside of Medina Munawwara. They're okay to go and teach something like what Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu did for the people of Kufa, but he wouldn't like them to just settle there and never come back. Even Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, near the end of his life, he essentially comes back to Medina Munawwara, and he passes away actually in Medina Munawwara, and he's actually buried in Al-Baqi. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, what did Umar radiallahu anhu say with regards to him? He used to say, Kunayfun muli'a ilma. He's a small container who is absolutely filled with knowledge. And for a long period of time, Sayyiduna Abdullah ibn Masud radiallahu anhu remains in Kufa. He's teaching the people of Kufa about the religion of Islam, and he's instilling within them this thirst for sacred knowledge. And then he later, like I said, returns to Medina Munawwara and passes away in approximately 33 Hijri during the caliphate of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Now, Uthman radiallahu anhu also plays a very important role, you could say. Not extremely important, but a significant role in the Hanafi Madhhab. Because why? What does he do? During his reign, he allows the Sahaba to spread out into the different cities. And so Umar radiallahu anhu preferred to keep the Sahaba within Medina Munawwara, whereas Uthman radiallahu anhu kind of gives that permission for people to spread out into the different lands. And that does help because more people now settle in Kufa. And we're going to come to how many Sahaba essentially settled in Kufa. A lot. Indeed, the Prophet ﷺ had said with regards to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, رَضِيتُ لِأُمَّتي مَا رَضِيَ لَهَا ibn Abd. And this is in Ibn Abi Shayba's Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba, and again in Imam al-Bayhaqi's Al-Madkhal ila Kitab al-Sunnah, which is that he said, I am happy for my ummah with whatever Ibn Abd, which was the kind of title or nickname of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. I'm happy for my ummah, whatever Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is happy for them with. There's actually a lengthy hadith. This is in Imam al-Bukhari's Sahih. Al-Qamat ibn Qais, he says, Qadim to Sham, I came to Syria, I came to the Levant, and I read 2 rakats. فَصَلَّيْتُ رَكْعَتَيْن. Then I said, Allahumma yassir li jalisan salihah. Oh Allah, create ease in me meeting a pious companion. So allow me to meet someone who's pious. فأتيت قوما فجلست إليهم فإذا شيخ قد جاء حتى جلس إلى جنبي قلت من هذا. So I made a dua, this just shows the sincerity of Al-Qamat ibn Qais. He makes a dua and he says, Oh Allah, grant me someone in this city who I can learn knowledge from. You can see the thirst of knowledge that he had. And then someone comes and sits right next to him. And then when someone sits next to him, he asks them, who are you? And the person says, I'm Abu Darda. So he says, Inni da'awtu Allah an yuyassira li jalisan salihan fayassaraka li. So he says, do you know what? I just made dua that Allah Ta'ala grants me someone who, is going to help me and allow me to benefit and grant me some knowledge from the people of Sham. And Allah's given me you. So now Abu Darda looks at him and he says, Mimman anta? Where are you from? Which tribe are you from? So he says, Min Ahlil Kufa. I'm from the people of Kufa. So now Abu Darda says, oh my God, haven't you guys already got Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? أَوَلَيْسَ عِنْدَكُمْ ابْنُ عَبْدٍ صَاحِبُ النَّعْلَيْنِ وَالْوِسَادِ وَالْمِطْهَرَةِ أَفِيكُمُ الَّذِي أَجَارَهُ اللَّهُ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ يَعْنِي عَلَى لِسَانِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم أَوَلَيْسَ فِيكُمْ صَاحِبُ سِرِّ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم لَا يَعْلَمُ أَحَدٌ غَيْرَهُ. That do you not have amongst you Ibn Abd, the person who used to hold the shoes of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? He used to hold the pillow of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He used to hold you could say the mithara, the bowl with which he would perform wudu. And is there not amongst you that same individual who Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had said that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has protected him from shaitan? Isn't there not that individual from amongst you who used to hold all of the secrets of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani in his Sharh Fath al-Bari, which is a commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari, actually says, المراد الثناء عليه بخدمة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وأنه لشدة ملازمته له لأجل هذه الأمور ينبغي أن يكون عنده من العلم ما يستغني طالبه به عن غيره. That what he is trying to say by this is that he's praising Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and that he's saying that because you guys have Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, you don't even really need to come to us. Why are you guys even bothering to come to us? Just to show you a bit more about Kufa, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu was someone, by the way, who he preferred to take the approach. Before I come to this, let me mention to you a few more incidents with regards to Kufa. So in this PowerPoint, I've just kept it quite basic, and I am going to mention a few more extra points, which are maybe not in the PowerPoint, but I want you to just take a note of this, inshallah ta'ala. So in my book, and it's going to be, I don't know, I mean, in the printed edition, Allah knows best what page it will be. To be honest with you, it will be exactly the page that I'm about to give you now. So I'd rather just explain to you a few more points with regards to Kufa. Have a look at what Ata ibn Abi Rabah said. Ata ibn Abi Rabah, once a person comes to Ata ibn Abi Rabah and he asks him a question, right? A person from Kufa. They come to Ata ibn Abi Rabah, who is from Makkah. They come to him, and this is an incident mentioned by Ibn Sa'd in his Tabaqat. Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'd is a very important book. So when he asks him a question, Ata ibn Abi Rabah is confused, like, oh, you're from Kufa. Why are you asking me all of these questions? He says to him, ما يأتينا العلم إلا من عندكم. knowledge does not come to us except from you guys, right? So Kufa was a place that was absolutely filled with hadith and knowledge and just fiqh and everything. A few more quotes. For example, Al-Ijli, he's got a book called Ma'rifatu Thiqat. Al-Ijli says in his Ma'rifatu Thiqat, نزل الكوفة 1500 من أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. 1,500 companions of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam settled in Kufa. There's another statement here of of Ibrahim al-Nakha'i. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i rahimahullah ta'ala, he says something that's quite interesting as well. He says, نزل الكوفة. I'm just going to show it to you. نزل الكوفة, here it is. نزل الكوفة. I seem to have lost it. In any case, I remember it more or less by heart, but inshallah ta'ala you can just double check it. It's in طبقات of Ibn Sa'd. He says, نزل الكوفة 70 من أهل بدر و300 من أصحاب الهديبية, or to that effect. He says 70 of the companions of the Battle of Badr settled in Kufa. And he's talking about the whole issue of reading 2 rakat salah just before Maghrib salah. So before Maghrib, are you supposed to read 2 rakat sunnah or not? He says in Kufa, 70 Sahaba from the people of Badr, from the participants of Badr, came to Kufa. And 300 from those who did bay'ah at Hudaybiyah. And he says that I've not seen a single one of them read these 2 rakats before Maghrib. In any case, the point here is to show how Kufa was absolutely filled with Sahaba and even you could say a hadith. I also want to quote to you a statement made by Dr. Ahmed Sanubar. He's got a book called Min al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam ila al-Bukhari. He says, ومن هنا يتضح سبب النشاط الحديث في مدينتي الكوفة والبصرة مع ضعفهم في المدن الأخرى مثل مصر واليمن والشام، فلم ينزل أي من كبار الصحابة مصر مستقرا بها وكذلك اليمن، والحال في دمشق على ما ذكرت، وعليه فمن الطبيعي أن نجد. He says that we do not find any of the major Sahaba settling in Misr, in Yemen, in Syria, in Damascus. It's mainly in Kufa and Basra. And that too, when it comes to Kufa and Basra, there was a bit of rivalry between the two cities, but Kufa was definitely had the edge. Kufa definitely had the edge, especially when it came to things like fiqh. When it came to things like fiqh, Kufa had both ahadith and fiqh both in this city, right? And this is very important because there's a very common misconception, which is that the Kufans had very little ahadith. Technically, the numbers don't lie. The numbers tell us quite clearly that that is not true. The Kufans, so many asanid actually come from Kufa, even in the Kutub al-Sitta. In fact, Dr. Sanubar, again, I'm just going to quote him. He says, نجد أكثر من ثلثي الأسانيد في الكتب الستة ترجع إلى هذه المدن الثلاثة المدينة المنورة فالكوفة ثم البصرة. That 2/3 of all of the chains of transmission in the 6 famous books of hadith, you will find them going back to these 3 famous cities: Kufa, Medina Munawwara, and Basra. In fact, let's just have a look at the qira'at, right? إن هذا الاهتمام انسحب على القراءات القرآنية فنجد أن أربعة من أئمة القراءات العشر من الكوفة، و2 من البصرة، و2 من المدينة، وواحد من مكة، وواحد من الشام. So if you look at the 10 qurra as well, the 10 famous qurra, if we look at this as well, we've got 4 of them, 4 out of the 10 are actually from Kufa. I mean, we could even go further. We could even look at things like Lugha. Look at how Lugha developed. Where did it develop? It developed in Kufa. So Kufa becomes really a real.
Check if the device is on your home Wi-Fi network.
Apologies, that's Siri there. I do have my iPad in front of me, which is where I'm reading from, by the way. So this is essentially what I'm trying to say, that Kufa is absolutely filled with ahadith, qira'at, lugha. It's booming with ilm. It's booming. It's a cosmopolitan city. And it's like, it's a place to be. And especially now, one more individual. So we've got like 3 key individuals who played an important role in developing Kufa. We've got the sending of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud to Kufa by Umar radiallahu anhu. Then we've got the kind of permission that Uthman radiallahu anhu, that he gave for Sahaba to settle outside of Medina Munawwara, and therefore Kufa now becomes more populated. And finally, Ali radiallahu anhu, he makes Kufa his capital. During his Khilafat, it was actually Kufa that he said, and he's actually passed away in Kufa, based upon what seems to be the most correct opinion. Whether he's buried in that current place, Allah knows best. But he definitely lived in Kufa. So this was his capital, and this played a huge role as well. Now, to the extent where we don't like to go so much into Orientalist research as well, but even, for example, take the writings of Motsky, even Schacht. Schacht says that in terms of abilities and in terms of knowledge, Kufa had surpassed Medina Munawwara. We might not go that far, but we would definitely say that it was a competitor for Medina Munawwara. Motsky, he has this discussion that he carries out a research, and I think his article is the role of non-Arab converts in the development of Islamic law, to that effect. If you look at all of the kind of non-Arab converts that he discusses, most of them, or you could say at least 50% of the kind of activity is happening in Kufa, and the remaining 50% is happening in Medina Munawwara. So these are two key centers that are developing as time comes along. And so when Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala comes to our center stage, he is in a place where he doesn't really need to travel very far, even though he does go to Medina Munawwara, he does go to Makkah, and he does travel to these places, but he doesn't need to. He's already living in a place that is absolutely filled with ilm, which is Kufa. And so we're going to move to our kind of second PowerPoint as well, just to kind of show you the development of hadith in Kufa. This is another quote that you could add. Dr. Sanubar, he says with regards to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, فَمَلَأَهَا عِلْمًا وتعليما وفقها وتفقها مما جعلها مدينة يمكن لنا إطلاق اسم المدينة الفقهية عليها، فقد ضاهت المدينة النبوية في الحركة العلمية في ذلك الوقت ونافستها في كثير من الأحيان. So he filled it in terms of knowledge and teaching and fiqh and tafaqquh, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, such that it was ضاهت المدينة المنورة. It was resembling, or it looks similar to the city of Medina Munawwara itself in terms of how it was literally booming with knowledge. And this was, at the end of the day, this was the end goal of what Umar radiallahu anhu wanted to achieve with creating a garrison city, which is that it resembles Medina Munawwara. It literally resembles Medina Munawwara. Now, what do we notice about how methodology works in Kufa? One of the things we notice is that obviously Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is their main teacher, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud comes from what we might refer to as the madrasa of Umar. The madrasa of Umar radiallahu anhu is the madrasa wherein you look beyond the literal meaning of every single text of the hadith of the Nabi or the Quranic ayat. I mean, we could have lists upon lists of incidents where Umar radiallahu anhu doesn't go with the apparent, and he wants to move away from the apparent, simply because of how he's understood Sharia and how he understands the meanings and deeper objectives of Sharia. And at times, he has the audacity, and we mean this in a respectful way, he has that ability to even gently question Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, Orientalists, they do, and they have done this already, wherein they cast doubt over this. They say, what type of a prophet do you guys have where even one of his companions could prove him wrong, na'udhu billah? It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about giving a different perspective, and it was about certain Sahaba having the ability to look at things beyond their apparent. And Allah Ta'ala had just blessed them. For example, just to give you a few examples, when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam reads Salatul Janazah upon the Munafiq Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, Umar radiallahu anhu quite clearly says, I don't think you should do this. And then the revelation comes kind of supporting what Umar radiallahu anhu considered to be correct. When it comes to the prisoners of the Battle of Badr, Umar radiallahu anhu is more inclined towards the idea that we just get rid of them and just kill them. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu are more inclined towards the fact that we should forgive and we should just, get a ransom and let them go. And the hadith is there, it's in Musnad Ahmad, etc., where Umar radiallahu anhu comes in the morning and he walks into Masjid al-Nabawi and he sees Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is crying, and he sees Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu crying, and he's like, why are you guys crying? What's happened? And they're not talking. And he's like, tell me why you're crying. If I can cry, so that whatever you tell me will be a reason for me to cry. And if I can't cry, ubaki ma'akuma, I'll try to cry if I can. Because he's really affected by why you guys upset. And I don't want you guys to be upset. What's happened? And then that's when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam tells him that, Allah Ta'ala has revealed verses to kind of prove that what you were suggesting was the correct approach. But lawla kitabun min Allahi sabaq. But that is just that Allah Ta'ala had written for it to happen, that they would be given ransoms and that the prisoners of Badr would go for ransoms. Otherwise, it would have been better to have just followed what Umar radiallahu anhu had suggested. So you can see the list would just go on and on. Mu'allafatul qulub. You can see the person who decides that, no, we don't need to do mu'allafatul qulub again. anymore is Umar radiallahu anhu. And so this deep understanding of the maqasid of Sharia and looking beyond the ma'ani, beyond the lafz, and looking into the more the ma'ani, you will find this within Umar radiallahu anhu. Sheikh Mustafa al-Zarqa, who's absolutely, um, one of the legends when it comes to fiqh and developing tafaqquh, one of the asatidha and teachers of Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda as well. He says, وَإِنَّ طَرِيقَةَ عُمَرَ الْفِقْهِيَّةَ كانت حجة خالدة لمدرسة أهل الرأي في العراق من فقهاء الطبقة التالية التي سيأتي ذكرها. فقد تأثر هؤلاء بفقه ابن مسعود في الكوفة وكان هو يسير على طريقة عمر رضي الله عنهما. Indeed, the fiqhi approach of Umar was an everlasting evidence for the Ahlul Ra in Iraq. So in Iraq in general and in Kufa specifically, they developed this approach, especially within the student of Umar radiallahu anhu, who is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. This is not to say Abdullah ibn Mas'ud isn't the student of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam directly, but he is influenced a lot by Umar. And I've gathered numerous quotes in my book from even Al-Ilal wa Ma'rifat al-Rijal of Abdullah ibn Ahmad ibn Hanbal, where Imam Ahmad is actually quite clearly saying and quoting through a chain of narration, wherein Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is quite clearly saying, I sometimes hold a position, then I find out Umar is contradicting me, and I change my position because Umar radiallahu anhu's position is ahabbu ilayya. So you can see the approach of Umar radiallahu anhu of not just going just by the apparent of the hadith or apparent of the Quranic ayah is very strong in Kufa. And you will notice this, and perhaps the person who takes this right to its full end result, or you could say the person who really fulfills this idea of looking beyond the text, is Abu Hanifa. And that's why he gets into trouble as well a little bit with some of the other scholars in his time who are just not ready for his deep analytical way of thinking, wherein he goes beyond the text and he really wants to kind of get to the nitty-gritty of why do we have to practice upon this. This was maybe a certain incident, this was a specific case, it's not the Sharia law itself. So this is quite important to appreciate, that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, he is very much influenced by Umar radiallahu anhu, and Umar radiallahu anhu has got this approach of looking beyond the actual text itself, and he developed this within his students as well. By the way, Abdullah Mas'ud, we have statements from him, as we know. Imam Ahmad himself says, أصحاب عبد الله كانوا يرحلون من الكوفة إلى المدينة فيتعلمون من عمر ويسمعون منه. That the companions of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, they would travel from Kufa to Medina Munawwara, and they would actually learn from Umar radiallahu anhu, and they would actually listen to him. So basically, this is probably during the lifetime of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and you can imagine they are during the lifetime of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, they are going from Kufa all the way to Medina Munawwara just to learn a little bit extra from Umar. So you can see the influence of Umar radiallahu anhu is quite strong. Sheikh Dhafar Ishaq Ansari, this is just by the way a comment by Sheikh Suhail Hanif, who's a fantastic writer, a modern day researcher as well, mashallah, really talented in the Hanafi Madhhab. He says the Iraqi city of Kufa was arguably the greatest center of Islamic legal thought for much of Islam's first century and a half. There's a lovely writer as well also. He's originally from Pakistan, passed away now, rahimahullah, late, just recently, to be honest with you, I think in 2018 or something. Iraq, he says, Sheikh Dhafar Ishaq Ansari, in his book, The Early Development of Islamic Fiqh in Kufa, he says, Iraq was one of the earliest centers of human civilization, was conquered by the Arab Muslims in 15 Hijri. Like I told you, there's some debate over when exactly it started. It was a process. It wasn't one specific year where they conquered Iraq entirely. It was numerous years. At the time of the conquest, the country was part of the Sassanid Empire, being a part of the orbit of Persian culture. The intellectual climate of Iraq was quite different from that of Hijaz. For the same reason, the Iraqians were familiar with religious doctrines and philosophical ideas with which the Arabs of the peninsula were either inconvenient or of which they were only vaguely aware. Moreover, there was a large number of local non-Arab converts, which constituted a much greater proportion of the Iraqi Muslim society than did the non-Arab converts in Hijaz. Being a melting pot of different religious and cultural traditions, it was no wonder that the Iraqians were in general less conservative. Less conservative means they were more bombastic. They were kind of just, they like to just express themselves. More ideas were flowing in Kufa, which also means more heresies, more deviance. That's 100%. And nobody's denying that Kufa became a place where a lot of people used to refer to the Kufa as the place where the devil comes from, right? The place where the devil comes, because it was also Iraq and Kufa and Basra and all of these Iraqian places where the Mu'tazila started in Basra, right? The Qadariyah, so to speak, right? Which would later become the Mu'tazila. They started in Basra. Also, many of the other, you could say, tribes and all of the other deviant groups, a lot of them did begin in Iraq, whether it's Basra, Kufa, etc. The Shias, all of this, you will notice there's a strong tendency in Iraq to have deviance as well, because it's just a melting pot. Everything's going on. The pact of intellectual activity there was faster, and its level higher than in the rest of the Islamic world during the Umayyad period. So we know this about the Umayyads, that they were quite, I don't want to say they had a bit of Arab supremacy within them, but there was this idea that non-Arab Muslims only had a nominal share in political power, especially with the Umayyads. Thanks to this, their ambitions chose cultural and literary channels for their self-fulfillment. So in Iraq, basically, during the Umayyad times, they're not getting to really have any share in political power. So they need to fulfill their talent in some way. So they kind of invested their abilities and their talents in cultural and literary channels, being possessed of a tradition of learning and of a mind sharpened by intellectual tradition and sedentary existence. Their role assumed paramount importance in the development of all Islamic sciences. It is significant that they played the pioneering role, they referring to obviously the Iraqians and the Kufans as well, even in the foundation and development of the sciences related to Arabic language, not to mention the purely Islamic sciences such as tafsir, seerah. Even the earliest writers in tafsir and seerah, you'll see a strong kind of strong representation in Iraq. It is from Iraq that most of the theological schools sprang up and most of the currents of theological thought originated. So that brings us to the end of kind of this PowerPoint, and I just want to go through the next one, and then I'm going to go through, inshallah ta'ala, the history of the madhab throughout the centuries. So if we have a look at this PowerPoint now, if we start focusing now on Abu Hanifa himself now. So we've kind of given the background of Abu Hanifa of Kufa, and now you just need to appreciate how Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala looks at fiqh and how he's influenced by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and the approach of Umar radiallahu anhu and this approach of looking beyond the actual text itself. So firstly, we need to appreciate what is fiqh. So Abu Yusr al-Bazdawi's got a lovely he's got a lovely definition. I'm going to kind of skip that one. I'm going to go to this one because it's nice and short and we've got limited time, so I can just cover this. Al-Ghaznawi, he says, معنى الفقه في اللغة الوقوف والاطلاع وفي الشريعة الوقوف الخاص وهو الوقوف على معاني النصوص وإشاراتها ودلالاتها ومضمراتها ومقتضياتها. The meaning of fiqh in linguistics is to be aware and to be informed. And in Sharia, it means a specific awareness, and that is awareness of the deeper meanings of the evidential texts and their indications and their inferences and their hidden details and their requisites. So what are they saying? Let me explain to you. This is something that's a common misconception. A lot of people, when I ask them, what's fiqh? What do you mean by fiqh? What does fiqh mean? They will say things like, oh, basically that salah is fard, zakat is fard, hajj is fard, that we need to do wudu before we read salah. That's fiqh. I'm studying fiqh. Really, what you're studying there is Sharia law. That's not fiqh. You're not studying fiqh at all. That would be the end result of fiqh. You're studying what comes after fiqh. So then what is fiqh? Fiqh is the process that gets you from the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma to the actual Sharia law itself. So this is how Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala seems to have viewed Islamic law. Islamic law is separate from the sources itself. It's the final end result of what the sources have come to bring. So this is the sources, and here I'm not referring to your food here, by the way, your ketchup and garlic and stuff. I'm referring to the sources of Sharia, as in your where you're getting your actual law from. So these are the original sources of Sharia, the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. You can see I have avoided on purpose. Qiyas. You will see Qiyas is missing there because Qiyas is an expression of fiqh. Qiyas is how you do fiqh. So how do we get from the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma to Sharia law? That's fiqh. That's where fiqh comes in. So if a person says to me, oh, by the way, I study fiqh, I'll be like, are you sure you study fiqh? Do you know what fiqh is? Really, very few people know how to study fiqh. And fiqh is just, it's really hard. Someone's going to say to me, well, Sharia law is very hard. Well, you've not even seen anything yet. That's just the end result of fiqh. The fiqh itself would be to learn how we got to this Sharia law. I mean, there's the easy parts. Salah is fard. Oh, easy. Aqimus salah. That is because al-amru lil wujub, etc. That's all easy stuff. But what about how did they extract this ruling from this Quranic ayah and this sunnah and this ijma, etc.? So this is very, very important, that fiqh is this extra process that takes us from here to the final Sharia law itself. So Is the knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah equivalent to the Sharia law itself? So, for example, a person might say, and we've all seen this, isn't it? We've seen these kind of programs where these little kids have memorized the entirety of Sahih al-Bukhari or Sahih Muslim, and then the Sheikh will say, you know, um, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, and then that kid will finish the full hadith. وإنما لأمر ما نوى فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله. In the middle, I remember there was this lovely, mashallah, cute video of this young boy who was, I think, he seemed like he was blind as well. But he had memorized the entire Kutubu Sitta, which is absolutely phenomenal. And that Sheikh's asking him, Hadith man? And he's like, Hadith Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And Hadith man? Hadith. He knows that who's the narrator, everything. Okay. Does that mean now he's a faqih? Wow, this kid, wow, he's going to become such a great scholar in the future. Maybe and maybe not. There's no guarantee really, because what he's learned is fantastic and amazing, but he has learned basically the Quran and the Sunnah and Ijma, and he just knows them. He just knows what they are. I'm assuming he's learned the Quran, obviously. If he's memorized so many ahadith, he will have definitely have memorized the Quran. So a person who's, for example, memorized the Quran, he knows the translation of the Quran by heart. He knows the translation of every hadith out there. That is not going to be enough for fiqh. Fiqh is the deeper understanding of these sources. So, and Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam indicates towards this. He says, رُبَّ مُبَلَّغٍ أَوْ عَامٍ سَامِعٍ رُبَّ مُبَلَّغٍ أَوْ عَامٍ سَامِعٍ. At times, the person who you pass the information on to has a better understanding than the person who actually heard it. So you heard it, you've known this hadith your whole life, but someone else comes and extracts a ruling from there, which really blows your mind, which you hadn't even thought of. So, in fact, Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, who was a very famous muhaddith, he's writing to the hadith scholars of his time, and he's encouraging them to kind of think about this idea as well. When he tells them, وَلْيَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْإِكْثَارَ مِنْ كَتْبِ الْحَدِيثِ وَرِوَايَتِهِ لَا يصير بها الرجل فقيها إنما يتفقه باستنباط معانيه وإنعام التفكر فيه. And know that increase in the writing of ahadith and just narrating ahadith, that does not make a person a faqih. Rather, a person becomes a faqih by having a deeper understanding of the Quran Sunnah. So this is the key idea that we try to sometimes get across to even maybe like our Salafi brothers and stuff as well. That what you guys are just basically doing is you have no understanding of what fiqh is. You say you do, yeah, we know what fiqh is, but you don't. You really don't, because all you're saying is basically, brother, follow the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, what do you mean by that? Because the Quran and Sunnah is basic. These are just the sources. That are you telling me that the Sharia law is so basic, na'udhu billah, that literally, if we just follow the Quran and Sunnah, literally, like, but what I mean by following the Quran and Sunnah is black and white, just following the Quran and Sunnah. What we would essentially end up with is a law that looks so random that even na'udhu billah, our current modern day nation state English law, whatever law you want to say, the American law, that would look better than the Sharia law, because it would just be so much more consistent. It would be so much, you just be following every random hadith out there. We have a hadith where Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he has urinated standing up, maybe because he was injured, maybe he was whatever. We have a hadith when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam he drinks water standing up. Also, what about all of those? And this is something that I want to kind of touch on as well. I call it the kind of we used to have a kind of TV show here when we were kids. We used to have this something called Doctor Who. So I try to term this as the TARDIS problem, and this is kind of inspired a little bit by Dr. Jonathan Brown's got a book called Slavery and Islam. It's decent, mashallah. At the start of it, he kind of carries out something which we might call a little bit of a TARDIS problem. So the TARDIS problem goes like this, which is we can't go back in time. We just don't have a TARDIS. So without the TARDIS, we have to be real with ourselves and say, could Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik have had access to certain material? Not written, I'm not saying written, but they could see certain things in their times which we just cannot see because it's not been passed down to us. So because we don't have a TARDIS, we are naturally going to be prisoners of what I call history. Prisoners of history means it's the epistemological limitations of history, which means there is a very strong possibility that Imam Malik, when he is saying that I have not seen the scholars of Medina practice upon this hadith, that is something which only Imam Malik can make a decision on. And anyone who comes after Imam Malik, now you can't go to Medina and say, well, I see everyone practicing on this hadith now. I don't get it. What does Imam Malik mean? Because you're not appreciating that he was speaking in literally like 120 Hijri, around about that time. And he passed away, obviously, a lot later than that, in 176. But like what I'm trying to say is that Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala has a vantage point which some of the later scholars, and so does Abu Hanifa, obviously, because he's even before Imam Malik. He passes away 150, born in 80. Imam Malik's born in 96. So he's about 16 years younger than Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. So they have an advantage of, and remember, Kufa is booming with Sahaba and Tabi'un. So Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik can see certain things which we just cannot see. So someone might turn around and say to me, "Are you saying to me ahadith have not been preserved properly, and Abu Hanifa had access to certain ahadith, and Imam Malik had access to certain ahadith that the later scholars did not have?" We're not saying that at all. That's not the point here. The point is, firstly, there's a possibility, although this is a separate discussion and I could go on a bit longer. Could there be chains of transmissions that reached Abu Hanifa in a stronger way, and then they reached the later scholars in a kind of more weaker manner? That's possible, 100%. But more, I'm trying to indicate towards the idea of tawaruth and communal practice, and what they could see with their eyes, and what they could notice was the practice. What was the final practice? What's the final Sharia law? So not just, so what you are demanding is, let's just follow what's written in the Sunnah. Not to mention that you have only got one evidence of the Sunnah, which is the hadith. What you have to do is be respectful and be humble and appreciate the fact that you are not living in 150 Hijri, literally 150 years after the Hijrah. You are living in 1447 years after the Hijrah. This is almost 1000 years. You can't demand certain things directly from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which the early scholars had access to. And so therefore, the madhahib more or less protect and preserve the Sharia law. That is what they're there for. They preserve the Sharia law. They give us the final end product. Sometimes the way I like to word it to students, and this might help. If it helps, good for you. If it doesn't, inshallah ta'ala, maybe you haven't got the same level of desire for food as some of us, the rest of us do. But I like to think of this as like your ingredients. Yeah. So this is your ingredients. So and then at the end of the day, you're gonna make your final biryani or whatever that's gonna be your final end product. Now, why would you want to kind of reinvent the wheel if you've already got the biryani and you're like, I want to go back to the original ingredients. I just want to see what the original ingredient. That is essentially, that is a really like simple way for me to kind of tell you that this is what the tradition of madhahib is. It's a discursive tradition where every age is working on the efforts of the previous age, and we're building and coming up with this type of understanding of Sharia law itself. So this is very, very important. In any case, so the knowledge of Sharia, the knowledge of the sources of Sharia law, you could learn Bukhari Sharif by completely by heart, Sahih Muslim by heart, right? Just like the person who learned إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوب. The same verses that we learned, all of those Sahaba will have learned those same verses. But you can see when Umar radiallahu anhu came to this verse, he's like, I know you guys have all memorized Mu'allafatul Qulub, but we're not practicing on that anymore. So you can see practice is beyond just the ayat and etc. For example, everyone's learned فَقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا جَزَاءً بِمَا كَسَبَا نَكَالًا مِنَ اللَّهِ السَّارِقُ وَالسَّارِقَةُ فَقْطَعُوا أَيْدِيَهُمَا. That the thief chop his hands off. We've all learned this, and every Sahaba will have memorized this, and all of the Sahaba who did memorize it will have memorized this ayah. But when it comes to approximately 18th year of Hijrah, or around about that time, I've got it in the book, when the Amul Maja'ah takes place, wherein there's a famine and there's not enough food, and people are now stealing a bit more because of the fact that there's a real harsh conditions. Umar radiallahu anhu actually doesn't chop off anyone's hands, because it's a famine, man. Things can go wrong, and people will become a bit desperate and do things that are silly. So let's not, otherwise no one's going to have any hands. We're going to have a handless society, because everyone's doing this right now, and everyone's doing a bit of a cheeky, taking a few pinches of food from this person and that person. So this is the idea that going beyond the text is only the ambit of specialists. You could learn every Quranic ayah and every hadith out there, and not to mention that you could learn every Quranic ayah and every hadith and have an amazing understanding of them, amazing fiqh of them as well. And even then, the final Sharia law that you come to will not be as good as the Maliki and the Hanafi Madhhab, because the Sunnah that you had access to, they had access to a bit more than that. They had access to actually seeing the Sahaba and Tabi'un with their own eyes, which you just have to be humble and appreciate that you just don't have that access. And a lot of people struggle with that. And they might not say it, but you can tell they really are struggling with the idea that why am I born in 1447 and why don't I get to make the same decisions that Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa made? I don't see the evidence for it. But the thing is, they did. And you have to just, some might say that this is like you're just throwing in the dark, rajman bil ghaib. But it's not if you actually appreciate that there was certain things that Imam Malik, like it's not just rajman bil ghaib. When you think about the fact that Imam Malik in Al-Muwatta is saying, أدركت مشايخنا على هذا. I found all of my teachers, the leading scholars of Medina Munawwara, upon this. Yes, we'll come to Imam Ash-Shafi'i just now, where Imam Ash-Shafi'i essentially questioned a lot of this. And he was basically of the view that, no, I think, we just need to focus on ahadith. And yes, now we are all essentially followers of the Shafi'i madhab. What do I mean by that? Imam Shafi'i felt the only way to access the sunnah of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is through ahadith, which may come as a shock to certain people. Some people might be listening to this and be confused, like, hold on, I thought ahadith was always the sunnah. No, the ahadith is what was one of the ways of reaching the sunnah. Pre-Shafi'i, it was one of the ways of reaching the sunnah. Post the Shafi'i, it became the only way of reaching the sunnah, to the extent where today, if some guys will come up to me and say, Mullah, this guy's not following the sunnah. He's not following this. What do you mean by sunnah? It's in Bukhari, it's in Muslim. Oh, okay, right. This guy thinks the sunnah is only what's in books of hadith. Because obviously, this is now the only way to reach the teachings of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam through a chain of narration. Again, because we are prisoners of history, we cannot go back in time. Whereas the beauty with Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik is, you could go on the day of judgment to Imam Malik and say, but what about this hadith in Bukhari? Why do you not practice upon it? And he'd probably tell you, I was well aware of this hadith, but what do you want me to do when I can see the likes of Rabi'ah and Az-Zuhri and all of them not practicing upon this hadith? What should I do? Should I just go with the hadith and see, or should I just go with the practice here? So this is very important, and this is very strong in Kufa and in Medina Munawwara. We're going to come to this just now. So it's important for me to kind of get that out of the way, that Kufa and Medina have this strong tendency to look at practice. And don't forget the other thing I mentioned just like about 20 minutes ago, which is the idea of looking beyond the text. So they would look beyond. So you could present a hadith to Abu Hanifa and he will just say, maybe this was a specific incident. Maybe this is why he did this. And this is more or less going to be the answer for Raf'ul Yadayn as well, by the way. You could find, I'll be honest with you, the riwayat for Raf'ul Yadayn are just so many that it's like, why did the Hanafis not do this? It's 100% tawaruth and ta'amul and communal practice. It seems 100%, even though all of these riwayat were there, it seems like the people of Kufa were just not practicing upon this. And when I say people, I'm not talking about laymen. I'm talking about the ulama, the Sahaba, the Tabi'un. They were just not practicing upon this. That's the only one that makes sense. In any case, just to kind of grind out this idea and really get it into your brains that knowing something is not the same as having a deep understanding of it. And fiqh is different from just knowing Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. Knowing is fine. Good. Well done. But going and understanding the deeper meanings behind that, that's a step further. That's like you get extra points for that. That's a faqih, right? A muhaddith is like the first stage. The next stage comes a faqih. And these are two separate people. And yes, it works the other way around as well, definitely. A faqih should not be acting like as though he knows a hadith inside out to the level wherein he knows how to establish a hadith. I know how to look at chains of narrators, etc. No, Allah has blessed you in a different way. You have a deeper understanding of whatever reaches you, right? So you should focus on that. Instead of just sitting there and narrating a hadith, leave that to the muhaddithun. They're better at that. So there's a story here, and I've quoted this in my book, and there's plenty of other stories as well. That a woman comes to, for example, she comes into the gathering of Yahya ibn Ma'in, Abu Khaythama, Khalaf ibn Salim, and they're discussing a hadith, and they're saying, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال رسول الله رواه فلان ورواه فلان ورواه فلان. The woman comes and then she just asks them a question that, guys, I got a question. Yeah, what is it? So basically I bathe the deceased individuals. So a woman dies, I have to give the bath, etc. After I've given the bath, do I need to perform ghusl? So now they all looking at each other like, I don't know, should you? I don't know. Then Abu Thawr is coming. And so they say to her, oh, alayki bil muqbil. Why don't you go to and ask the guy who's just coming inside the masjid right now? She goes, she asks him. He responds by saying, Naam, yes. تغتسل الميت. لحديث عثمان بن الأحنف عن القاسم عن عائشة أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لها أما إن حيضتك ليست في يدك ولقولها كنت أفرق رأس رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالماء وأنا حائض قال أبو ثور فإذا فرقت فإذا فرقت رأس الحي بالماء فالميت أولى به. فقالوا نعم رواه فلان وحدثنا فلان. So basically, Abu Thawr says to her, no, it's fine. You don't need to be performing ghusl, and you can bathe the deceased, and you don't need to be performing ghusl after that, due to the hadith of Uthman ibn al-Ahnaf from Al-Qasim, where Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Aisha radiallahu anha, indeed your menstruation is not in your hand. So the hadith was about something totally different, whether Aisha radiallahu anha can come into the masjid. Um, he basically extracts a ruling from the hadith. As soon as he extracts a ruling from the hadith, the muhaddithun start narrating that hadith from all the different chains of transmission. They start narrating the hadith. So the woman looks at the muhaddithun and she says, فَأَيْنَ كُنْتُمْ إِلَى الْآنِ? Well, like, what benefit is it now that you're narrating to me this hadith from 100 different chains of narrations, wherein I've already got my answer now. It was understanding the hadith that I was kind of missing out on. And that's where you guys needed to help me out. So you can see understanding goes beyond just knowing, right? And this is also important. So that brings me back to, so knowing, let me just highlight this so you can see what I'm trying to say. If I just know loads of Quranic ayat and I know lots of the Sunnah, which for us in our times is going to be a hadith, and for Imam Malik and Imam Abu Hanifa is going to be a hadith, along with tawaruth, communal practice, and seeing what the Sahaba and Tabi'un are doing. And I know every single ijma. I've learned al-ijma of Ibn al-Mundhir by heart. I've learned the al-ijma, the book of Ibn Hazm, Maratib al-Ijma, I've learned it by heart. I know every single ijma book by heart. Okay, fantastic. I also know Quduri by heart. So I've learned Sharia rulings by heart as well. I know Quduri by heart. I also know, mashallah, I know Ad-Durul Mukhtar by heart. I know Raddul Muhtar by heart. I know Shami by heart. I know every single book in the Hanafi Madhhab. I know it by heart. Even the Maliki Madhhab, the Hanbali Madhhab. Awesome. So that means I'm a faqih now. Not really. Even knowing just the simple rulings of Sharia doesn't really make you a faqih. You could literally, so there's two types of literalism that you'll just fall into. You'll just feel every Quranic ayah is to be practiced. You'll come across mu'allafatul qulub and you'll say, let's do it. Let's give to the people, let's give zakat money to those who we hope need to come into the fold of Islam, or they have come into the fold of Islam, but we're worried that they're going to basically leave very quickly. But there's Umar who's going to come and he's going to check you and he's going to say, oh, hold on, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? There's no need anymore. And you're like, oh, wow, I never understood it like that. So you're going to become a literalist either on here, or you're going to be what I refer to as a madhabi literalist. What that means is, but the madhab said this. Simple. Don't move away from the madhab. Otherwise, this will happen. So the madhab has explicitly said you can't do this, and that's it. We only care what the madhab has said. So, what are we supposed to be following a madhab? This is the point. You are supposed to be following a madhab, but yes, at times a person, if he's developed abilities within himself of fiqh, which is a deeper understanding of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma, then at that point, yes, definitely, he shouldn't just be sticking directly on the madhab to the extent where it's like he's not even going to move, he's going to stick to it rigidly. It's not like that. Rather, this person is going to be, he needs to be aware of his community. He's going to be aware of, okay, what does my community need? What works for my community? What is all of these? What's the urf? What's the haja? What's the darura? What's the maslaha? What's the, all of these things? What's the saddu dhari'a? At times, the madhab might be allowing something, but it's not good for his community. It's not going to work. For his community, he needs to, so this is important as well. This is also a part of fiqh. So just have a look at some of these statements. We've done some of these already. Look at what Ibn Nujaym says. This was a very famous Hanafi scholar. He says, فالحاصل أن الفقه في الأصول علم الأحكام من دلائلها كما تقدم. فليس الفقيه إلا المجتهد. A faqih cannot be anything except a mujtahid. He has a deep understanding of the Quran and Sunnah and Ijma, etc. And this is something I want you to think of. So this is how I would define how Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala was. You've got all of these different meanings of the Quran, Sunnah. You've got all of these different meanings of fiqh. The primary meaning is going to be this one here. An understanding of the deeper meanings of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. This thing here, literally. Can we call this fiqh as well? So this, I would say, if you're just students and you're wondering what I'm trying to get across to here, let me just explain it to you in like simple wording. This is Quduri. This is Hidayah. Quduri teaches you this, the final ruling. I mean, sometimes, I can't remember to the top of my mind, not very often, Quduri sometimes gives you some legal reasonings as to how we got to this ruling. Usually though, it's just, وَيَجُوزُ عندهما وقال أبو حنيفة لا يجوز. That's it. Then Al-Hidayah comes, and remember, Al-Hidayah is almost like a commentary on Mukhtasar al-Quduri. Al-Aini says this because, I mean, Al-Jami al-Saghir is a very small kitab. And Al-Hidayah is a commentary of a book called Bidayatul Mubtadi. And Bidayatul Mubtadi is a summary of, it's basically a, a, a it's basically, you could just say it's Quduri, right? And without getting into the whole discussion. So Bidayatul Mubtadi is written by the author of Al-Hidayah. And essentially now he's combined Al-Jami al-Saghir and Bidayatul Mubtadi, and then he's writing a commentary on it. This is the part that Sahib al-Hidayah is trying to draw your attention to right here. And this is where Quduri is. Other books that are on this level, I would put Al-Mabsut of Al-Sarakhsi, Sharh Mukhtasar al-Tahawi of Al-Jassas, and other books would go under there. Bada'i al-Sana'i. I always refer to them to my students as the 4 fiqh books. And the more you read of the fiqh books, the more you become a faqih. And that's why, I'll be honest with you, this might sound really nasty, but it's a small group of stuff, so I'll just say, I really don't have a lot of, I don't pay too much attention to like online fatwas, even though I have an online fatwa website. I don't really, I always want to know, but like, where did he get this from? And what's the fiqh here? Is he following the fiqh, or is he just following the zahir of the madhab? And that's fine. I mean, I'm okay with them following the zahir of the madhab as well. That's no problem. But it's not really going to be something that's going to interest me so much. But if someone is, oh wow, he's really understood something from the fiqh here. I'll give you a good example of where, for me, like the fiqh really kicked in recently. And we were having this discussion with our iftar students. Like, let's take something as simple as like the tasbih ring, right? So I've got tasbih ring. I don't know if you'd call this a tasbih ring, but this is the one that I've got right now. So I mean, you'll see so many people just following the zahir of the madhab. Illa al-fiddah. Anything besides silver, can't be having that on your finger at all. But that's not really looking at the fiqh of the mas'ala here. Was this real command from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the way Imam Muhammad mentioned it in Al-Athar, etc.? Was it ta'abbudi? Did they really understood this to be like, no, it can't be anything besides silver. That's it, nothing. Or was it that some of them, is including the likes of Qadi Khan, Sarakhsi, so you're working still within the madhab, they understood this as being due to a reason. And it seems like that for me is the stronger position. And that if you have a look at our fatwa on islamicknowledge.co.uk, you will see, inshallah ta'ala, a direct engagement with the fiqh of the actual mas'ala. And this is something we really try to focus on with all of our fatwas. We don't just follow like as though it's like black and white ruling of the madhab. We do follow the madhab. We stick to the Hanafi madhab, by the way. But we look at the fiqh behind the bab, the chapter, and then we work according to that. So I'll give you 3 of our fatwas, or 4, 5 I could give you, of where you will see that fiqh quite strongly with our fatwas. The first one is the tasbih ring fatwa, which alhamdulillah, I'm very happy with that one. I've not seen anything yet so far. Just to give you a reference. For example, recently there was a fatwa by the Darul Ifta Chicago, Mufti Abraham Mirza, who I have tons of respect for. Again, unless they've got more evidences for it, which they've not let us know about, I'm just going by what was in the footnotes. I read it. I didn't think I think there was a lot missing there. And if you look at ours, there's a lot more references there, or from even scholars like Sheikh Zafar Ahmed Uthmani, who have understood this whole ruling to be a lot more based upon reasonings, etc. And I don't want to get into it, but just have a read of the two articles, and you'll see a big difference, inshallah. I'm very confident you will find our fatwa to be a lot more sensible on this issue. And that's all just looking at the fiqh. We've not even gone into the concept of Rasmul Mufti yet, which is where we look at maslaha, haja, darura. I mean, how many people can do dhikr whilst they're driving with a bead? How many people can do that? I mean, you could end up having a crash. Whereas with this, you could finish full ma'mulat with your on the road. How are we stopping people from doing dhikr with a tasbih ring just because it doesn't qualify as being from silver? Can you see how you can be a literalist here as well? No, but the hadith says, or the madhab says, nothing except silver. That's it. But like, why? So fiqh is always about asking why. And that's, your fiqh lessons need to be more interactive and more lively and more shouting than your hadith lessons, because that's where you are engaging in like the deeper meaning. You're not just following. And that's why there will be a very big difference between your fiqh lessons and your hadith lessons. They should be anyway. Another fatwa, again, sorry to just promote the Islamic Knowledge website, but it's not to promote the website, it's to promote fiqh and to just show you how we try to engage as much as possible with fiqh. That's our end goal. We've got a fatwa on makhit. What is stitched clothing in ihram? So we've tried to really get to the fiqh of what defines that clothing which you're not allowed to wear in ihram. And another one is our fatwa on fragrance in ihram, which I would highly recommend. Again, we've tried to look at the fiqh of the actual how a fragrance works. So this is what I'm trying to say to you, that the madhab or fiqh is beyond just Quran and Sunnah ijma and the Shari'i legal ruling. No, it's the engagement in that entire process. We're going to move on, inshallah ta'ala, and I'm going to try to now get into the two. And you see this group, by the way, amongst the Sahaba, and this is something that, by the way, I always give as like an example, right? And I do this all the time as like an experiment. So you've got this type of crossway here. You can see there's no cause. This traffic light here doesn't exist except to allow people to pass by. So it's gone red. These people have gone. They've crossed. This man with his suitcase, he goes by and he crosses there. Is this thing going to turn to green straight away? Not really. And I've seen this with my own roads or in Blackburn, etc. as well. And you'll see it in Canada or wherever you're from, you'll see that it stays red for about 5-6 seconds still. Then it flashes to amber, maybe for about 2 seconds, and then it will come down to green. What do? Do you stand and wait for oxygen to kind of also pass through, or do you go? I've seen the vast majority of people stop, right? And there are no cameras, by the way. You must be thinking, oh no, because they're probably scared of. We can see clearly there are no cameras. So what is that? What made them stop there? It's more a literal interpretation of what that red light is saying. I need to stop. That's it. So within the Sahaba as well, whereas I'll be honest with you, myself, I actually did check the DVLA, the road standards, etc. And I think I found something. I can't remember if it's true or not. If it's accurate, I did find something along the lines of you are actually allowed to go, which would, by the way, contradict something that a lot of people think is a legal requirement that you must stop when the light is red. But in places like this where they both cross, there's absolutely nothing, no one here, not even a dog, not even a cat. And literally people will stop. They just stop. And it's like, guys, I don't know about you guys, but I'm just like baffled. Like, what is? I know it's only like more than a chill, man. It's just 5 seconds. I know, but I'm more baffled at like the human type of psyche here. Like, what are we doing? Are we all just like I don't know. We're all just sitting there, just waiting for carbon dioxide and oxygen molecules to just pass through. What are we waiting for? I think even if there was a police directly behind you, I think the policeman would definitely let you go. And he wouldn't even say anything. I think even the policeman might even horn at you like, come on, go. If I was the policeman, I would like, come on, please move. So you can see within the Sahaba, literally from the time of the Sahaba, there was this idea of nope, but the hadith said this. The hadith is red. That's it. And then there was the approach of Umar radiallahu anhu and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and as we'll come to Abu Hanifa, which is, no, but what's the red light there for? It's to make us stop because people are crossing by and they've crossed. So why are you still waiting? Keep going. Why do we still need to follow mu'allafatul qulub? Why do we still need to, how are we going to cut the hands of people when there's a famine? The whole point is to stop people from stealing. Now, if we're cutting hands, there's other reasons as to why they're stealing. They're just going to carry on. So you can see this approach right from the time of the Sahaba, and you can see this in the story of Banu Qurayza, when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam essentially says, no one should read their salah except in Banu Qurayza, and it was Asr Salah to the best of my knowledge. And then, two groups from the Sahaba, one group decides, nope, if the Asr Salah comes along the way, we're going to read it. And the other group says, no, I mean, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, we must read in Banu Qurayza. So if the Salah becomes Qada, we will read in Banu Qurayza. They basically of that group, which is the light is red, I'm going to stop. And the second group is basically saying, hold on, the light's red, I get it. But the people have gone. Let's go, guys. Right? So you're going to see this approach within the Sahaba. And it's not black and white. It's a spectrum. It's a spectrum. So Abdullah ibn Abbas, Aisha radiallahu anha, Umar radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you'll generally see this approach of being a bit more applying the reasoning behind it. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Abdullah ibn Umar, you will see a bit more of wanting to stick to what Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam directly did. Simple. But that doesn't mean you won't see the opposite as well at times. For example, when it comes to inheritance, you'll see Abdullah ibn Abbas is very literal. He's very literal. Similarly, Aisha radiallahu anha, she can be a bit literal on certain things. But other times, she's very much looks at the meanings. For example, the whole women coming to the masjid issue, whether I'm not going into that mas'ala, should women become, I'm looking at just her, look at how she's thinking about things. Then let's look at Abdullah ibn Abbas. Just the other day, we came across the concept of ramal, right? When Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu is told by his people that, your people, they believe that we should do ramal and ittiba. Ramal means to run in the first, or to walk briskly in the first 3 rounds, or to keep the right hand out. He's saying the people are telling Abdullah ibn Abbas that everyone thinks that's sunnah. So he says, Sadaqu wa kadabu. Sadaqu wa kadabu. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did it for a specific reason, but that reason is no longer found. So he never used to do ramal. He didn't believe in it. Umar radiallahu anhu, interestingly, you would think, okay, then Umar would have gone with that. It's interesting. I was discussing this with the iftar students just yesterday, or the day before yesterday. I was thinking, and I said this, I think this is why it happened. And literally the next line, Sarakhsi says exactly what I was kind of suggesting, which was really nice. And alhamdulillah, I'm very happy that some great scholar like Sarakhsi had beaten me to it. Which is, Umar radiallahu anhu initially thinks, no, hold on, why should we need to do ramal anymore? He actually says this. He says, forgot the Arabic, but he says, who should I show my who should I show my strength to? Like, why am I doing this ramal? He says that for a little while. And then after that, he says, nah, we're going to do it. We're still going to do it. Right? Iqtida'an bi sunnati Nabi sallallahu bi sunnati Nabi sallallahu. So he does it. And we all do ramal today. To this day, we do ramal. Now, the thing is, but the reasoning behind the ramal is no longer found, which is that the kuffar of Makkah were essentially laughing at the Sahaba and saying, oh, look, the plague of Medina has affected them. And that's not found anymore. No one's even allowed well, they weren't anyway, in Makkah. To be honest, no one was allowed for a long time. No non-Muslims are allowed. So who's going to laugh at us whilst we're doing tawaf? Why do we do ramal? Who are we showing off our strength to? But the idea that I was thinking, Wallahu alam, and this is not mentioned in the text, and this Umar, again, the problem of history, we can never go back in time and ask Umar. We'll only ask him on the day of Qiyamah, like, why did you decide to keep ramal? But I think the idea that came to my head straight away, and I had not read the next line from Al-Mabsut of Sarakhsi, but if you think about it, it will have come to your mind as well by now. Why did Umar keep ramal? And the simple reason that came to my mind, Wallahu alam, and like I said, as soon as I said this, Sarakhsi said exactly the same thing, which is the entire process of Hajj and Umrah is more or less copying people's actions. So in Sa'i, we're copying the action of Hajar alayhi salam. In, like, when we're pelting the devil, we're kind of copying the action of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. When we're slaughtering, we're copying the action of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail. Yes, there is a lot of it which is tawqif, and we don't know the reason behind it, which is like tawaf, for example, even staying in Arafah and a lot of this. We might not know the full story behind them, but even them, they might be based upon a story of a certain Nabi, etc. So Umar radiallahu anhu is thinking, why not make this, or why not keep doing this? Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it, so no one can say we're making it up. We are doing it. Why not maintain it as a part of the Umrah? Because just like we maintain certain elements of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's great-great-grandmother and great-great-grandfather, Hajar and Ibrahim, why not maintain certain actions of the actions of their great-great-grandson, who was literally the final messenger, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the greatest messenger? So that's the, I think, idea that I had in my mind. And straight away, Sarakhsi says that لأنه حكايات أفعال لأن العمرة والهدي says كرمي الجمار فهو, it's a following of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. So why not just follow Nabi? So that's the idea there, that you will see within the Sahaba this tendency to at times be very literal. At times they will be very, very much looking beyond the legal, beyond the actual text, right? And this is what we meant by, that's why Sheikh Abu Zahra rahimahullah, he calls Umar radiallahu anhu Shaykhu Ahli Ra'i. And this is the idea with Ra'i. The Ahlul Ra'i are essentially like this, that they are trying to look beyond the actual text and trying to come up with a law that is going to be consistent. This law that the Hanafis are coming up with, they want it to be extremely consistent. And they want it to be like fully in line with the needs of the people. And it needs to be like, it functions like it moves with the times. So do you understand? Otherwise, what happens when you become like, you get rid of fiqh, you throw fiqh in the bin, and honestly, your Sharia law just becomes like a stagnant. It's so robotic. It's literally your law is that red light and the guy who stops at that red light. Whereas once you allow fiqh to come in, now you see, okay, for this community, it's jais. For that community, it's not jais. Like that. Literally, that's how fiqh works. And that's why I'm a big believer, by the way, and I say this quite openly. as a hypocrite, I don't believe in online fatwas. I'm against online fatwas. Even though I have an online fatwa, we try to keep our fatwas not very specific. We keep it very, very vague, and we try to keep it just like there's a difference between the fatwa and the fiqh, but that's a separate topic. But why am I not very much for online
That's
fatwas?
very, sorry for interrupting. That's actually very interesting because I have been very vocal. When I put the caveat as social fatwas, because a
Hmm?
lot of times they talk about marriages and
Yeah, yeah,
businesses and interaction with people.
yes.
And so I'm really glad
It's
to hear that from you.
Yeah. So I actually believe, and I write it in the Hanafi book at the end of the book, but I don't know how it will be received, inshallah. Let's see. I think most people agree, to be honest with you. It's interesting. I actually say that the term online fatwa is oxymoron. So oxymoron is like two opposite words. Because, and why do I say that? Because fatwa is a deeply personal ruling, and it's literally specific to that one person and for that one individual. Whereas online would suggest this for everyone. So it's like all of our fatwas, and this is me coming from someone who obviously studied with Mufti Ibrahim Desai. And this is quite important. We'll come to this. The Hanafi Madhhab is very much of this approach that a teacher can disagree, a student can disagree with the approach of their teacher. And I love Mufti Ibrahim Desai to bits. But yeah, do I believe on Ask Imam certain fatwas should just be removed totally, 100%? I don't think they should still be there. That was for that person, for that one incident, for what happened in their life. Similarly, there are certain fatwas that are for Australia and for America or for Canada, and they're not for the UK. By putting it online, what everyone thinks is that that is literally for everyone. And so this is where fitna will also start, because a person will come to their local imam and he'll be like, no, but I saw online this. What did you see? Because I'm seeing my community. You're not seeing what I'm seeing. So fiqh and fatwa are two different things, and that's important as well. Again, I'm digress. We're going to come back to the topic just now, but I think that's an important point to address, because this is all connected to the idea of looking beyond just the apparent of the madhab itself as well. So inshallah ta'ala, what we'll now do is we're going to look at basically, we've discussed this, and now we're going to look at the sanad. So you can see Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, every single one of these scholars, by the way, did exactly what I just said there, which is they would look, these guys would not be stopping at that red light. Let me put it like that. Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman would probably go through um, the red light. And by the way, I'm not talking about a red light, normal red light where there's actually a possibility of you crashing into a car by them. I'm talking about this red light where you're just waiting for people to pass by, and they've passed. So what are you waiting for? Keep going now. Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa, Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, sorry, I keep saying that because there is a Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa as well. Hamad ibn Abi Sulaiman, he would go past. Ibrahim al-Nakhai actually says, I could quote some statements of Ibrahim al-Nakhai. I'll just avoid it because it'll just take a bit of time. But even certain ahadith, Ibrahim al-Nakhai says, I take from the ahadith what I think is in line with the maqasid of Sharia, essentially, and certain bits I'm not going to follow them because I think they were for a specific incident that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did this. So you can see he's looking at it as like, what was the overall objective of Sharia that it's trying to achieve all the time. Al-Qamat ibn Qais also, not someone who would follow things so literally. Abdullah ibn Masud, definitely not. He was from the madrasa of Umar radiallahu anhu, and obviously they believe that they are the true representations of the Sunnah of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, which is to create a Sharia law which is consistent. And that's where the whole concept of a ra'i comes in, which is ara'aita. You've said this here, but you said that there. How is that consistent? Because Sharia law has to be consistent. What we have to have is this final box here has to be very consistent. And I'll explain to you why. Imagine, and I always give this example, I'm sure there's a better example out there, but I always use this because it's related to driving and cars and people enjoy it. But if you parked on like what we have in the UK called a double yellow line, where it's a place where you're not allowed to park, and you got a fine for it, and the fine for example, parking there was £100, and then the next day you said something to someone, got into a fight, Allah protect, go into altercation, you assaulted them. Don't assault anyone, please, in your life. But in any case, you did. And they gave you a fine of like £50. How is that consistent? Like in the first scenario, there was a potential to harm, and here you did harm. And the punishment was, and that's exactly the kind of idea that Rabi'atul Ra'i has when he goes to Sa'id ibn Musayyab, and he asks, and this is at the end of Muwatta, at the end of Kitab al-Muwatta of Imam Malik, I think it's in the Qisas chapters in there, he asks that, Kam fi isba'il mar'ah? How much if I break a woman's finger? So he says, Ashrum min al-ibil, 10 camels. And he says, Kam fi isba'in? How much if I broke two of her fingers? So he says, Ishrun. Kam fi thalath? So he says, Thalathun. Kam fi arba'? He says, Ishrun. So he says, إذا عظمت مصيبتها نقصت عقلها. When her calamity became worse, suddenly now what she gets is less. So Sa'id ibn Musayyib looks at him and he says, "In Iraqiyun ant? Are you from Iraq?" And he says, لا بل عالم متعلم بل متعلم, or to that effect. He says, rather, I'm just here to learn. So he says to him, إنها السنة يا ابن أخي. It's the sunnah, oh my nephew. So you notice even within the tabi'un, Sa'id ibn Musayyab in Medina Munawwara, a little bit more literal. I don't want to say too much literal because he was also labeled as Al-Jari. He would answer a lot of questions as well. Whereas with Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who is the teacher's teacher of Imam Abu Hanifa, he's a lot more interpretive. So coming back to this now, essentially, this is how Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was. And this is how he would train his students, by the way. There's a very famous incident wherein he's taken to Baghdad, and this is near the end of his life. And he asks, his students present a mas'ala to him. And he gives an answer, and then they look at him and they say, that's the wrong answer. He says, okay, what's your evidence? They give him all the evidence. He says, he gives a response to every single evidence. And he says, nope, this is the right answer. And then he says, okay, what do you believe now? They say, we believe what you just said. So what if I told you you are wrong, I'm also wrong, and there's a third opinion that's actually correct? So like, nah, that can't be. So he actually gives an answer to all of his current dalail, and now gives dalail for the third position and gives a response to all of the other dalail. Then he says, are you satisfied? They're like, yep, 100%. The third opinion is correct. So if I told you the third opinion is wrong, my opinion was wrong, and your first opinion was actually the correct opinion. They're like, no way. So now he gives a response. So you can see he's developing the minds of his students to see that not everything is black and white. We need to apply our fiqh. We need to have a deep engagement and involvement. And this is what upsets me sometimes with people. This is what upsets me, because I think it's an insult to Sharia that they come to us and say, but the hadith says this, the Quranic ayah says this. You wouldn't say that to the judge. You wouldn't say that to your policeman. But the law, sometimes people do, don't get me wrong, they say, oh, I'm allowed to video anyway. But when you're in front of the judge, good luck trying that, because you know the solicitor will tell you as well, just don't speak honestly. You could make the case a lot worse, because you know it's very technical. Hold on, I don't want to mess up my court case here. I'm defending myself. Because now you have respect for the law and you know your life. But when it comes to Sharia, everyone's allowed to talk. It's not like that. You need to have a deep understanding of what's at play here. So the students of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, they say they develop these abilities within them. So Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad are his two most important students. And they actually, when Rabi'at al-Ra'i comes from Iraq to Medina Munawwara, Imam Abu Yusuf, look at what he says. He says, in ja'ani biqawlina, if he tries to present to us our opinion, i.e., he holds the same opinion as the people of Kufa on a certain mas'ala, نَظَرْتُهُ عَلَى قَوْلِهِمْ, I'll pretend like as though I have their opinion and I'll debate him. وَإِنْ جَاءَنِي بِقَوْلِهِمْ نَظَرْتُهُ عَلى قَوْلِنَا, and if he presents to us his opinion, i.e., the people of Medina, I will debate him based upon our opinion. So they want to get to the bottom of what is the most consistent position in Sharia. And so therefore we have the three foundational pillars of Hanafi fiqh, which is number one, communal practice. We've spoken about Kufa. We've spoken about the importance of how many Sahaba settled in Kufa. In fact, there's strong evidence to suggest that whenever the Hanafis say هذا حديث مشهور, it's not going to fulfill those conditions you read in Hanafi Usul al-Fiqh. And this is very, very important. I don't know how much I can explain that. There's not enough time for me to explain this, which is that Hanafi Usul al-Fiqh came after the fiqh, right? And so that doesn't mean we throw the Hanafi Usul al-Fiqh in the bin, na'udhu billah. But it also means you need to understand that certain things was what we call post ex facto, and it's to kind of explain and it's try to make sense of what was happening in the fiqh. So you will see the early Hanafi A'imma, like Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, will say, وَهُوَ حَدِيثٌ مَشْهُورٌ. Now later Hanafis will define hadith mashhur. It is that which in the first generation there on only is khabri wahid in the second generation. Then it became, right? You can see the idea, or it became khabri, it was khabri wahid in the first generation, second generation it became. All of these definitions of mashhur now pop up. In reality, what it seems as though is that mashhur was just a reference used by Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Yusuf, and of course we don't have any clear books of Abu Hanifa in fiqh, but it seems like it was just a reference used by these two A'imma towards the practice of the scholars of Kufa. And there's good books on this written. This is a good one by Salah al-Hajj, As-Sunnatul Mashhura Inda al-Hanafiyya wa Tatbiqatuha fi Kutubihim. There's also a book by Sheikh Suhail Hanif called Mashhur a marker for Kufan precedent, which is also very, very good. So essentially, the second pillar that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala is using in his fiqh is something which I call ma'ani fiqhiyah or aqisa amma, qawaid amma, established by the Quranic verses and the Sunnah. Sunnah either through ahadith or communal practice and the application of istihsan. What that means is they've come up with qawaid, so many qawaid. I'll give you a qaida that they've come up with. They want the law to be consistent and therefore they pick up. The Hanafis have an obsession, by the way, and you'll notice this if you've read Hidayah carefully. You'll notice, and I said this to a student, someone needs to do this research. What's the size of the ahadith that are quoted in Hidayah? What's the maximum size you'll notice? Hanafis prefer, and they will have a general tendency towards ahadith that are short and they're almost like a qaida fiqhiyah. They will have a tendency towards it. I'm not saying they'll always go with it, but they will have a tendency towards it. I'll give you an example. Al-Kharaju bid-Daman, they like to go with it. Even though the hadith, even if it's not fully established from the perspective of muhaddithun, they will prefer it. They will like it. Al-Imamu Damin, they will go with that. That's like we have to follow this. Al-Imamu Damin. They will be obsessed with that because that's what's going to help us maintain consistency in our Sharia law. So qawaid fiqhiyah are going to be very, very important. This is not going to be like al-umuru bi maqasidiha. This is not what I mean here. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about qawaid amma that are in khas specific abwab. They are onto specific chapters. For example, the breakers of wudu are that which come out of your body, not that which come into your body. الوضوء ينتقد or الوضوء breaks بخروج النجاسة لا بدخول شيء في البدن. So a person might say, oh, will my wudu break if, for example, something comes into my body? No, it's going to break if something comes out of your body. All of the pattern, there's a pattern behind the law, and that maintains consistency in the law. And so therefore, khurujun najasa is going to be the key breaker of wudu. And that's going to be connected with another idea, which is not just khurujun najasa, because if the Hanafis say that if you just take off the skin of the body and now you see blood, that's not khuruj, it's still in its place. It needs to flow. Okay. And then they connect it with the idea of impurity. Only those things which break your wudu are going to be impure. So this is like a kind of riddle that I sometimes give to my students, that who's that bacha who's covered in blood, but his salah is still valid? And it's that bacha who the blood on his clothes is blood which is not flowing blood, right? It's the blood is not flowing. And therefore, even though he's covered in blood, it's not actually najis. So you can get blood which is not najis, which is blood that came out of your body and did not flow. It just attached itself to another part of your jabba. It's not najasa at all, right? A vomit, your baby vomits. The other day, one of my toddlers, they vomited on my jabba, but it was less than a full mouth, not najis at all. But if it was full mouth, it would have broken the wudu if obviously the child had been mukallaf, and therefore it would have been najis. I can't read salah with all that on my jabba. So you can see it's connected. The fiqh is creating a consistent, you could say, set of laws. And so now, if you've just got one hadith that's contradicting the entire system, they will give preference to the system over that one hadith. And the final one, just before we take like a 5-minute breather, inshallah ta'ala, and then we'll come back and go through the whole history throughout the centuries, inshallah, is like the Hanafis are quite obsessed with the fact that the Quran has an epistemological superiority over the ahadith. So this is something which they refer to as Ardu Sunnah al Quran, which means if the Quran is saying something, we must follow the Quran first and then accommodate the ahadith within the Quran, if that makes sense. And there are plenty of examples. This doesn't mean that we don't follow the ahadith, rather, we give everything its appropriate place. What we are saying is that because the establishment of ahadith is not as strong as the establishment of the Quran, we will not give the same ruling to the ahadith as we do to the Quran unless the hadith is mutawatir or it's been fully practiced upon by the scholars. Then we will obviously treat it essentially exactly the same as the Quran. I'm thinking with that, essentially, we've gone on now for more or less like about close to 1.5 hours. We'll take a 5-minute breather if that's okay with Monna.
Yeah,
And
of
then
course.
inshallah ta'ala,
Take a
we'll
10-minute breather,
reconnect.
no problem.
Yeah, we can keep it inshallah ta'ala. Okay, no problem. Let's keep it 10 minutes and then we can come back and then kind of for like half an hour or about 25 minutes inshallah ta'ala. We'll just go through how the madhab developed throughout the centuries and then we can just open up for some questions inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we'll just make a restart. Bismillah ta'ala. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so inshallah ta'ala, we're now looking at the final section here now, which is kind of like about the development of the madhab throughout the kind of centuries that we have. So firstly, it's very important for me to just jump to two charts that I want to have a look at. The Iraqi school and the Transoxiana school. So Transoxiana is like just a fancy name for the whole Stan countries, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, right? So we refer to this as Ma Wara al-Nahar because it's beyond the Oxus River. And two famous schools essentially developed in the Hanafi madhab. The one famous school was the Iraqi school, and the second famous school was the Ma Wara al-Nahar school. I do apologize. There's some construction work going on. I'm just going to close my.
We
Subhanallah,
can't
that's
hear
better.
anything, just so you know.
Yeah. So I just thought it might just disturb you guys. In any case, I want you to guys to just have a look at these two charts. This is Transoxiana. This place becomes very important after 400 Hijri. After 400 Hijri, all of the main fuqaha, so Sahib al-Hidayah, everyone, they all come from this area here. Before 400 Hijri, the most prominent place is, of course, Iraq. Iraq and that whole area, which I can, inshallah ta'ala, there's another map which I could send over a bit later. But for now, I want you to look at this. This is what we call the Iraqian tradition, the Iraqian school and the Mawara al-Nahar school. So this, if you can see, obviously we've got Imam Muhammad there, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Zufar, and you got his son, Imam Abu Hanifa's son, Hamad ibn Abi Hanifa. From amongst these scholars now, again, this is a very basic chart. The chart that I've now got in front of me is a bit more detailed. I'll try to send a more detailed chart in there. You can see this individual here, Al-Karhi, Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi, Abu al-Hussein al-Karhi, Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi, sorry, rahimahullah ta'ala, is the most important individual in the Hanafi madhab in Iraq. After him, you could say he is like what we refer to as sometimes the first teacher of the Hanafi madhab in Iraq. What does this mean? Before Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi, you get something which we refer to as semi-Hanafis. The tradition is forming around Abu Hanifa slowly, slowly. And people are now making Abu Hanifa's opinions authoritative, or rather they're working within a paradigm wherein Abu Hanifa's opinions are playing a central role within this paradigm. It's something which sometimes the Western scholars or academics, even Halaq, etc., they refer to it as authority construction. They're now considering Abu Hanifa to be an authority, and they're forming a community around his views, and they're commentating upon his views, and they're defending his views, and they're extracting more opinions based upon his views until the madhab matures in the time of Al-Karhi, and he becomes what we refer to as the first official teacher of the guild school. The official formation of the madhab is madhahib. All four madhahib really. It's complete around about 325 Hijri. That's where you got a clear Maliki, a clear Shafi'i, a clear Hanbali, and a clear Hanafi. What this means is that the Hanafi madhab is only Hanafi in that it starts with Abu Hanifa. Otherwise, it's the collective thought of traditions of scholars that are trying to come up with four different sets of literally this final box here. Four options on your menu. Four different ways of looking at the Quran and Sunnah. Quite literally is the way to think of this. So you've got, this is the Iraqian tradition. And you can see Al-Quduri is a very, very important scholar here. Al-Jassas, Abu Bakr Al-Jassas, who is the student of Al-Karhi, is also incredibly important. You got Al-Tahawi. Al-Tahawi is actually in Egypt. The Hanafi madhab prospers in Egypt up until the Fatimids take control. And this is straight after Al-Tahawi, about 50 years or so after Tahawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the Fatimids take control of Egypt. And at this point, you could say the Fatimids are the nemesis of the Abbasids. And so they would, on purpose, they would make an active effort to ensure no Hanafi Qadi remains in Egypt and every Hanafi Qadi is removed. And that is the reason why, Wallahu Alam, and the Hanafi madhab doesn't really come back to Egypt. If anything, it goes more towards the eastern side of the world and it ends up in Uzbekistan and all of these countries. I say Uzbekistan, obviously at that time it's not there, but just to make you understand, the Mawara and Nahar countries and those areas, they get more of the Hanafi madhab than Egypt, because Egypt is just Hanafis are more or less, there's less representation. We can't say they wiped out, but there's less representation after Tahawi. And Tahawi is part of the Iraqian tradition. But you might say, well, hold on, he's from Egypt. How is he part of the Iraqian? A lot of the Iraqian teachers of the Hanafi madhab, they moved to Egypt. So Ahmad ibn Abi Imran, for example, and then also Tahawi, by the way, himself travels to Syria. and studies under Abu Khazim, who was a Qadi there. Um, Bakkar ibn Qutayba is a very famous Hanafi who settled in Egypt. As you can see, he studies under Hilal al-Ra'i, and who had studied under Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah and Imam Zufar. So Bakkar ibn Qutayba is more or less coming from this area of Iraq and al-Ray, which is also in that whole region, Khurasan, etc. And then he comes and he settles in Egypt, and he becomes the main Qadi of Egypt for many, many years. Hatta it becomes a famous statement like Qadi Bakkar, right? His intelligence, etc., becomes almost like people speak about it. So this is the Iraqian school. I'd rather just summarize this for now, and then we'll get into the details in the next 10, 15 minutes, inshallah. And this is the Transoxiana school. Now, this is obviously very, very hard to zoom into, but I will try to send over. It will let me actually zoom in. So that's really cool. Inshallah, I'm just going to zoom into some of these names, and you should be able to kind of see what's going on here. So we've got Abu Hanifa is obviously this entire part here. Just bear with me. This entire part here is the Iraqian tradition. This part here. This whole like section on the right, even quite a bit on the left as well. You could say it's mainly the Hanafis in Iraq. Then this scholar is very important. You'll notice he was missing. Abu Hafs al-Kabir is missing from the Iraqian school. So I'm just going to go back here because he actually moves and he travels from Mawra al-Nahr, from Bukhara, right? And he's actually one of the asatidha, one of the teachers of Imam al-Bukhari in fiqh was Abu Hafs al-Kabir. He travels from Bukhara and he reaches he reaches Imam Muhammad, and he studies al-Asl and all the books of Imam Muhammad he studies. And Imam Muhammad's the author, by the way, of the kind of the most important books in the madhab. Imam Muhammad is the author. He writes the 5 books of Zahir Riwayah. Some people believe it's 6. Correct opinion is that it's 5. And they are al-Asl. And what is he doing, by the way, in these 5 books? He's compiling the opinions of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, and his own opinions. And he writes 5 books: Al-Asl, Al-Jami' al-Saghir, Al-Jami' al-Kabir, Al-Ziyadat, and Ziyadat al-Ziyadat, both of which we can consider as one. And then Al-Siyar al-Kabir. Al-Siyar al-Saghir was a part of Al-Asl. So Abu Hafs al-Kabir is the student of Imam Muhammad. He goes back to Bukhara, and you could say literally every sanad of every important Hanafi faqih, you can see literally the top part would be Iraq, and this whole section here is all of it is connected to Mawra al-Nahr. Every important Hanafi faqih who came after these 2 scholars was more or less. So I don't know if you can kind of correlate with me here. You'll notice there's like a big block here, and then there's like a big block kind of just above that. So, and then it seems like as though the real connection between these 2 blocks is about here. And who are these 2 scholars who literally cause what you might call a tajdeed of the Hanafi madhab in Mawra al-Nahr? It is Al-Halwani and As-Sarakhsi. Al-Halwani and Sarakhsi tradition, every single major Hanafi comes from the Halwani-Sarakhsi tradition after them. So take, for example, a very important Hanafi, even though he might not have written so many books, but his sons and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, all of them become very important Hanafi fuqaha. Burhanuddin al-Kabir is the student of As-Sarakhsi. If you look at Burhanuddin al-Kabir, his son is Sadr al-Shahid. Sadr al-Shahid is the teacher of Imam Ali ibn Abi Bakr al-Marghinani, the author of Al-Hidayah. Take Qadi Khan. He's the student of Zahiruddin al-Marghinani, who is the student of Burhanuddin al-Kabir, who is the student of As-Sarakhsi. I mean, take anyone, take Ghassani, a very famous Hanafi scholar. We could find Ghassani, even though Ghassani, he later moves to Aleppo, right? He moves to Aleppo, and we'll come to that just now, why they moved to Aleppo, etc. If you look at his tradition as well, you'll see it connects with Sarakhsi. So Ghassani, student of Alauddin al-Samarqandi, and Alauddin al-Samarqandi, as you can see, if you just follow the arrow, is the student of Fakhr al-Islam al-Bazdawi. Fakhr al-Islam al-Bazdawi is the student of Al-Halwani. So you can see everyone connects to Sarakhsi and Halwani, or at least to Halwani for sure. Halwani is incredibly important, and he is obviously from the Bukharan tradition and the Mawra al-Nahr tradition. Now, how did the madhab essentially end up there? I told you that Abu Hafs al-Kabir he plays an important role. There were some scholars even before Abu Hafs al-Kabir that are also quite important, but I want to just basically kind of go through century by century, right? So that's why I'm just going to go through very quickly, and then we can stop there and we can take some questions, inshallah ta'ala. But we'll start off with, for example, the key events between um 200 to 300. So let's start with 200 to 300. We said that the Hanafi Madhhab is forming at this point. I'm just going to mention a few important things that are happening as well. Let's do 200 to 300 is when we've got the period of the students of the A'imma. So you've got Hilal ibn Yahya al-Ra'i, Bishr ibn al-Walid, Al-Hasan ibn Abi Malik, Abu Sulaiman al-Juzijani, Abu Hafs al-Kabir, Muhammad ibn Sama'a. All of these important students of the A'imma, Isa ibn Aban, Musa ibn Nasr al-Razi, Mu'alla ibn Mansur al-Razi is not on the picture as well, but he needs to be here somewhere as well. He might actually be here somewhere. So all of these essentially students are living during the period of 200 to 300. Now, I want to focus on 300 to 400 because this is quite important. This is important because Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala became the Qadi al-Qudat of the Abbasids. During the time of the Abbasids, not just for Harun al-Rashid, but also during the time of Al-Mahdi and Al-Hadi as well, Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala is the Qadi al-Qudat. He is making all of the important decisions for who becomes a qadi. And yes, that will have played some important role in spreading the Hanafi madhab as well. However, some have questioned whether that was the only thing. It definitely wasn't the only thing. There was a few other things as well. And I discussed that in the Hanafi book. But just to get into kind of like, what do we notice happening between 300 to 400? So firstly, you can say 300 to 400 is where Tahawi exists. So we start to notice books on the formalization of the Sunni Aqidah occurring. And Abu Hanifa is inaugurated as being an Imam of Ahlul Sunnah. Even though before this, Imam Abu Hanifa may have been looked at a bit negatively. After 300, it's rare. And that's why Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi and Ibn Hibban and some of these scholars who do attack Abu Hanifa, they were kind of really like, they were castigated by quite a few scholars because like you're now writing after the period wherein that his imama is not to be questioned. And all he was doing was, he was basically just doing what you and I do when we go past that red light because there's no one there. And it might have looked bad if you are of the view that, no, you should stop. But if you're like Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, and you're like, hold on, everyone's crossed the road. Why am I not allowed to cross? Those times have gone now, and now everyone appreciates what Abu Hanifa was trying to do. You're just trying to save time. I'm giving my analogy of crossing that. So at the time, it might have looked like he's going through a red light. Stop him. He's a deviant. But now we realize, hold on, there was a reason why he held those opinions, etc. So that happens around about 300. And Al-Aqidah al-Tahawi is important because the literal Aqidah begins with al-Tahawi saying, this is the Aqidah of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Muhammad, and Imam Abu Yusuf. So Imam Abu Hanifa is a very lucky person, I would say. Firstly, I say Tahawi is a very lucky person because as much as to this day, they call them Haddadis. I didn't even know what that meant until 2 weeks ago until someone explained it to me. But these are like hardcore Salafis who believe that Abu Hanifa is still a deviant, etc. I mean, even then, they've got no way to escape the Aqidah al-Aqidah al-Tahawi. It's like you can't escape the Aqidah of Imam al-Tahawi. What a lucky person. Everyone's fighting over whose Aqidah is more in line with Imam al-Tahawi. Probably even more luckier, or more lucky, let me say, than Imam al-Tahawi was Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, because although Imam al-Tahawi is lucky because his Aqidah, everyone's vying to have his Aqidah because everyone's like, no. Look, our Aqidah is the Al-Aqidah of Imam, is the Al-Aqidah Tahawiyah is our book, basically. Every group or, claim will be made for this book. Tahawi is actually saying, my Aqidah is the Aqidah of Abu Hanifa and Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad. So they can't escape that Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, in terms of Aqidah, etc. They have all these issues, irja. I discuss it in the book. Again, we've not got time. It's also the period 300 to 400 where in mukhtasarat are being written. So we've got important mukhtasarat in 300 to 400 Hijri being written. It's during this period, by the way, that we call this like the Shi'i century, right? So we've got the Fatimids coming to power in Egypt. The Buyids are taking control of the Abbasids in Baghdad and that whole area. And Abbasids are more or less like puppets now. There's a few moments, for example, during the period of Al-Qadir, where in the Sunnis become a bit strong, etc. But even then, it's kind of like a tussle between the Buyids and the Abbasid Caliph. There was a very tense kind of relationship there. So you have Mukhtasar of Imam al-Tahawi, Mukhtasar of Imam Abu al-Hasan al-Karqi, and even the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Quduri, rahimahullah, who passed away 428, was most likely probably written around about this period. In fact, there's a story in Mu'jamul Udaba of Yaqut al-Hamawi, if I'm not mistaken. Or yeah, Mu'jamul Udaba, I think it's in there. In the biography of one of the scholars, wherein Al-Qadir Billah, obviously the famous Al-Qadir Billah, the Abbasid Caliph, who was probably the most staunch Sunni out of all of the Abbasid caliphs. And he writes letters between him and Mahmud al-Ghaznawi. There are letters wherein he's actually like, Mahmud Ghaznawi is like showing off to him that, I raided India and I did this, and I did it for the people of the Sunnah, etc. And he's really proud of him, etc. He is the one who might have commissioned, Allah knows best if this story is true, he might have commissioned the writing of Mukhtasar al-Quduri, right? Allah knows best. So it's like all these Mukhtasarat are being written, Mukhtasar Tahawi, Mukhtasar al-Karhi, which we don't have, but we've got the commentary upon Mukhtasar al-Karhi written by al-Quduri called Sharh Mukhtasar al-Karhi li للإمام للإمام القدوري رحمه الله تعالى. Also during this period, Manaqib books are being written on Imam Abu Hanifa. Like I said, his Aqidah is established as being fully in line with Ahlul Sunnah, and now also Manaqib books are being written. So Imam al-Tahawi himself, he leads. Imam al-Tahawi, I would say, leads, you could say, like the battalion of reforming, or you could say rehabilitating the image of Imam Abu Hanifa. And I don't mean that in a kind of like a bad way that, oh, Imam Abu Hanifa was not a good person and then no. I mean in the sense that he showed to the Ummah that this man was a blessing for us, not some deviant that you think he was, or that he's going out in the red light all the time and he doesn't like to follow the Quran, he doesn't like to follow the Sunnah. Rather, he's got a deeper understanding of things, and he's actually really intelligent, and he was ahead of his time. That's the way Tahawi likes to that's the impression you get from Tahawi, that he's really, really proud of Imam Abu Hanifa. In fact, in one of the stories, he says, someone says that someone says they make a comment to mock Abu Hanifa, to say that alayka bi ithmi Abi Hanifa, upon you may there be upon you the sins of Abu Hanifa. So Imam Tahawi hears that and he gets so upset, and he actually says, I wish I had the sins of Abu Hanifa, and I wish I had his good deeds, because I would be guaranteed Jannah type of thing. Like I would have a high hope of entering Jannah with that. Not guaranteed, of course. So you notice this happening between the Abbasid period is weakening, obviously, as we know. Around 358 Hijri is when the Ismaili Shi'as, which is the Fatimids, take control of Egypt. Then the 12 Shi'as, which is the Buyids, take control of the Abbasid Empire. And at that point, from 300 to 400 Hijri, essentially, the Buyids are in control. It's a Shi'i century, so to speak, right? Even the Hamdanids, all of that is there. So on the eastern side, again, we've got limited time, but just to have a look at what's happening on the eastern side. 300 to 400, we had this empire called the Samanids. Samanids actually come from Balkh, and Balkh was a heavy center of Hanafism. And there's a whole history behind that as well. And I don't have the time, and it'll take too long to get into, because it's to do with Irja and, Abu Hanifa's beliefs on Irja and how that impacted Balkh. When the Samanids end up in Mawra al-Nahr and they take control of, and they get rid of the Tahirids. First is they have to there's a bit of issues that happen, right? There are all these governors of the Abbasids that have kind of become semi-independent. And amongst them is the Tahirids, who are basically named after a very important general that played a very important role in the Abbasid revolution as well. His kind of lineage and his kind of dynasty have taken control of this area. You could say on the edge of Iran, on the eastern side. The Samanids kind of have it out with them, and they defeat them, and the Samanids have taken control of the entire region, have become independent from the Abbasids. You could say just around about 200 and something, or basically within the 300 Hijri, they've become completely independent from the Abbasids. Again, it's too hard to kind of tell you the whole world history of what's going on, but it's during this time that the Samanids are sponsoring Hanafis. And we have some important books written by the Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi is in this time, basically, during the time of the Samanids, Samanid Empire. And so he compiles his creed around about, interestingly, probably the similar time as Imam Tahawi, because Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi passed away in 333. Imam Tahawi passed away 321. They're literally contemporaries. And so they're both compiling an aqidah which both of them feel, and they are very resemblant to one another, even though obviously some brothers will disagree. But both of them are attributing themselves to Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa's madhab becomes very strong in the East. After the Samanids, again, I think it would be futile of me to kind of go through everything. I'm just going to give you an overview. The Samanids are broken up into two empires, obviously. The we've got the Karakhanids and the Ghaznavids. Mahmud Ghaznavi obviously is a Hanafi. The Karakhanids are also Hanafi. Hanafism is extremely strong amongst the Karakhanids. That's where we get Sahib al-Hidayah, by the way, living under the Karakhanids, Qadi Khan, Sadr al-Shahid. Sadr al-Shahid, actually, he's called Shahid because he passed away in a famous battle called the Battle of Qatwan, which took place in literally 536 Hijri. And he died in that battle because they were fighting against a dynasty called the Western Leo dynasty. And there's a whole incident about why this battle took place. But it's still there, that place where they fought, etc., is near Samarkand and that whole area there in Uzbekistan. In any case, the Karakhanids and the Ghaznavids are two important empires. At one point now, you've got another Turkey, and these are all Turkic kind of, tribes basically that have become very Samanis were Persian, right? They come from Balkh, but the Ghaznavids are the first, you could say, Turks that have now fully embraced Persian culture and Hanafism as well. And same thing with the Karakhanids as well. And then you got another Turkish tribe that kind of pops up. And I don't want to get into the whole Turkic tribes, etc., the Karalukhs, etc. But from amongst them, you've got the Seljuks that pop up. The Seljuks were proper Hanafis. All of these lot were Hanafis. Everything you see happening on the east is Hanafism. And that's all this. That's why all of these scholars here, they were living under these empires, quite literally. And it's the Seljuks that are going to be really important because they are the ones who bring the Hanafis back to the West. Yeah, back to Baghdad, back to Iraq, back to all of these places where in the Hanafis had been prominent a long time ago until the Shi'is had taken control of this whole area. They obviously, save the Abbasid Caliph as well and kind of like are saviors of Sunnah. And they take control of Baghdad, very famous incident around about mid 400 Hijri. 450 or something, when they enter Baghdad, they get rid of the Buyids, and now the Seljuks are in control. And then they split up as well into the Seljuk Sultanate of Rome, and that causes obviously the Crusades. The Crusades come. When the Crusades happen, obviously there a lot of disintegration. There's a lot of integration, or rather the Seljuk Empire has become very disintegrated. And remember, it's in the Seljuk Empire that you get scholars like Al-Ghasani, who was in the Seljuk Sultanate of Rome. And then he later settled in the Zangid dynasty. And he was actually very close to Nuruddin Zengi, extremely close. In fact, Nuruddin Zengi, he wants, at one point, he wanted to go back to Qasan. Qasan is actually from the east. But when the Seljuks came to the west, they brought so many Hanafis with them. So when he's in Aleppo, he wants to go back to east. He wants to go back to Transoxiana. He wants to go back to Mawara an-Nahar. And the story is in Al-Jawahir al-Mudiyya of Al-Qurashi. And he, Nuruddin Zengi kind of pleads with him and says, stay here, please. And obviously, Nuruddin Zengi was very close to ulama. He was very close to Ibn Asakir, of course, as well, who passed away 571. So Kasani then says, look, speak to my wife. It's my wife that's doing this, and she really wants to go back. So there's a long story, but finally he convinces his wife Fatima that, let's stay here. And he actually passed away, and he's buried right next to his wife in Aleppo. And so what I'm saying to you is, Hanafis start to reappear again back in their homeland. Astaghfirullah, how these Banu Israel are saying, give it back into our homeland. Hanafis finally get back to Kufa and Baghdad. And obviously, Kufa is not very important after Baghdad was made in 145, but Hanafis get back to even Egypt. And when the Ayyubids come to power, and Ayyubids obviously grow out of the Zengids and Sultan Salahuddin, and after the Crusades, etc., and they've taken control of Jerusalem and all of these areas, little pockets of the Crusaders are still left in Acre and these places. Then obviously we have the Mongols pop in. As the Mongols pop in from the east, obviously you can imagine the Hanafi migration to the west increases even more. And so now you got literally all the Hanafis on board. And that's where, and I'm going to end with this, that's where you get kind of like a tajdeed, or you could say like a revitalizing or revital, I don't even know how to say the word, but basically there's a revival of Hanafism is probably the best way to word it. There's a revival of Hanafism in Egypt, and you get the likes of in the Mamluks, especially, as the Mamluks are the first people to kind of not just the Mamluks, sorry, the Delhi Sultanate in India, they also stand up to the Mongols, and both places become strongholds of Hanafism. Mamluks as well, especially because, again, we don't have time. The book goes into all of this, the 4 judges that the Mamluks made, and that created a lot of diversity in Egypt in terms of madhab. Hanafi madhab was strong in Egypt, especially after the Mamluks. Every madhab had some kind of something to say in Egypt. To this day, that's how it is, isn't it? Egypt's like a place where you get everything. And India was a strong place for Hanafism because the Ghurid dynasty, which kind of grew out of the Ghaznavids, and they got rid of the Ghaznavids and they gained control of that. But then at one point they were kicked out by the Khwarezmian Empire. Khwarezmian Empire would be defeated by the Mongols. As the Ghurids are kind of getting kicked out by the Khwarezmians, one of their kind of slave soldiers, Qutbuddin Aybak, establishes a kind of little dynasty close to the I think around India, in India, because I think that was their head basically, the
In
Ghurid
Delhi, right?
dynasty in Delhi. Yeah, in Delhi, apologies. And Qutbuddin Aybak is basically the start of, not literally the start of the Delhi Sultanate, but it's at this point where you've got all of these different dynasties, the Khilji dynasty. And then the Tughlaq dynasty is very important. The Tughlaq dynasty for the Hanafi Madhhab is extremely important because that's where we get the first, you could say, the what I like to call the grandparent of Fatawa al-Hindiya. So everyone knows al-Hindiya, the Mughals wrote Hindiya, but no one knows that before Hindiya was written, Tatar Khaniya was actually written under the Tughlaq dynasty. And it was actually, there was actually a patron of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, one of his kind of, you could say, generals, maybe not in his army, but like one of the patrons in his under his control was I believe his name was Tatar Khan. So, and then I've got it all in the book, but again I don't have time to read directly from there. So he's the one who pays quite a bit of money to Indarbati to get loads of books for him, and he writes a massive book which is probably in the library of so many Hanafis today, mashallah, Fatawa Tatar Khaniya. And that later on, then the Delhi Sultanate, it's a long story. Long story. After the Mongols, then we got the four Khanates, and then one of them actually accepts Islam, and then all of them slowly start accepting it, two of them at least, and then the others start disintegrating, and then Tamerlane pops up, and then the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum have been destroyed by the Mongols, but then out of them these little beyliks begin, and the Ottomans pop out, right? And again, I'm just using like really basic baby language to make you understand it, otherwise there's so much intricacy behind some of this stuff. And then as because the Ottomans are still developing, obviously, when Tamerlane comes, and first he launches a raid on Delhi, and he, the dynasty, the Tughlaq dynasty is already kind of finishing anyway. He gets rid of them, and after Tamerlane, Delhi is never the same really. And there's a full book about this as well. Again, we don't have time. Tamerlane then comes towards the west, and as he comes, he obviously he raids Damascus, very famous. Ibn Hajar speaks about this. And then obviously the very famous Battle of Ankara. And that battle could only have happened, by the way, because of the fact that Ottomans are still developing. And I think later on, if he was to take on the later Ottomans, the likes of Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, and especially Sultan Suleiman, at that time, the Ottomans are just unstoppable. So Hanafism, long story short, becomes very strong in two important empires, Ottomans and Mughals. Obviously, in the middle, we have this empire that pops up, the Shi'i Safavids. And don't worry about them because they're not important to our discussion of Hanafism, because this is more about a Sunni tradition. So Ottomans and Mughals, and then it's these two empires that are finally kind of clinching on to the Hanafi Madhab. And both of them, by the way, this all proves the idea that the Hanafi Madhab was all about solving problems, giving answers, looking at the deeper meanings of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma', and to come up with rulings, because this is what would help the empires and the emperors of the past. And this is something that scholars have said, that the Hanafi madhab became very popular simply because it provided solutions in places where in the other madhab maybe just didn't provide them. That's not just the only reason. There's a lot of more reasons than that. But this is an important reason, that the Hanafi madhab was never afraid to give an answer. It wasn't reluctant. It wasn't like, no, la adri, I don't know. No, Abu Hanifa was very confident. He was bombastic. He was lively. He wanted to go. Sometimes he'd go away from the Zahir of the Quran, Zahir of the Hadith, Zahir of whatever. He'd move away from it. Even I was about to say Zahir of the Quran, but there's nothing wrong with saying that, because the Zahir of the Quran, according to the Hanafis, many times it will be qat'i, sometimes it can be dhanni as well. So this is very important. And then at that point, you could say more or less, as soon as the colonialism kind of kicks in, at this point now, the Hanafi madhab is brought to an end, and the Khilafah is brought to an end. And that is where we are right now. Essentially, the whole idea is that the madhahib, and specifically the Hanafi madhab, had a lot of flexibility. Now, what I mean by flexibility is not that it was just so easy, you can just follow whatever you want. No. It worked according to every single community. If it needed to be strict for a community, it would be strict. If it would be lenient for a certain community, it would be lenient. It fulfilled the needs of people. And what I mean by the needs here is spiritual needs as well. So not that, oh, it made everything easy for everyone. No, the Hanafi madhab was a madhab that, and not just the Hanafi madhab, but specifically the Hanafi madhab in particular, it would be it would be a madhab that would fulfill the needs of people spiritually and also their dunyawi needs as well. Until colonialism came in, and what colonialism more or less did was, and you can read about, and mashallah, there's some lovely videos by Imam Tom from Yaqeen Institute, who I think has really, he's really simplified a lot of this stuff in video format. I would highly recommend watching some of his videos on what colonialism did to Hanafi fiqh or fiqh in general in India, etc., even other places as well, Egypt, etc. as well. Just look at what it did. It would basically, it made fiqh into like a type of black and white and made it look dogmatic, made it look, and until it came to a point where in people realized we can't be, they broke down the awqaf system. They broke everything slowly down. And they would, there's a book by a professor by the name of Professor Sohira Siddiqui, I think called Islamic Law on Trial, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. It's just come out recently. Another book which we've spoken about it in our course on the history of the ulama in the subcontinent, where this book kind of shows that even the translation movement that was carried out by the colonialists, this was to kind of, it was when you're translating a book, so they translated Al Hidayah, for example. I think Hastings or someone, he translates Hidayah. So when they're translating it, they're more or less forcing their nation state law onto the Sharia law. And they basically got rid of Sharia law very, very discreetly, but kind of just simmered it down until you had these Sharia courts, and then slowly, slowly like that, the madahib come to an end. And this is where we are essentially, where we're not under an empire which is following really any madhab, we're under nation states. And so we're in totally different terrain. So everything we just discussed about the madahib, which was just a very, I can't believe I actually even did what I just did there. I was so silly where I just went through random empires. It's, inshallah, please don't think that the book is like this. It's a lot more organized. There's a lot more references, a lot more academic than what I just made it sound like there. I think I just used the word pop up at one point. The Ottomans popped up, as if you'd say that. But in any case, you get the idea. Inshallah, this is where we are. And so now essentially we are following a madhab which has become sadly very personal. It doesn't apply to anything beyond our own personal lives, which is really sad. I think this madhab has a lot to offer. I think the Sharia has a lot to offer, isn't it? It's not just about the Hanafi madhab, it's about the Sharia. And out of all the different madhab, I think this is the one madhab which, inshallah ta'ala, we hope that when the Khilafah comes back, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but uh, when the Khilafah comes back, inshallah, it will really solve a lot of the problems. But we won't be thinking about fiqh back like how we did in the past. Now we'll be using different things. Obviously, we'll be thinking about, okay, we've got AI now, we've got this, we've got that. All of that will play a role. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll be applying our fiqh again to find solutions to new problems, inshallah, when the Khilafah is back. Bismillah. Inshallah, I'm okay to stop there, inshallah, Sheikh.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. Thank you for being with us. Question, did you make this chart yourself?
I did, yeah.
You have a
So I
very good comprehensive understanding of history. How did you do that?
SubhanAllah, I think the most important thing was kind of just piecing everything together. I think this helps, making sure you've got a globe or something where you can keep looking at maps.
Do you know about Cronus?
No, Sheikh, I don't.
Can I show you Cronus real quick?
No, no.
By the way, guys, if you want to head out,
As
you
in,
can
I've
head
not
out.
seen it. Go for it. Go for it. Sorry, I meant no. As in, I've not seen it. Go for it. Bismillah.
Yeah, so Cronus is something I use in my history class. It's a map of the earth,
Wow.
and you can go through history, and it'll show you who ruled what area.
Wow. Please do share this if you can.
Yeah, so Cronus.org.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I don't like the new version. This is the classic version. So for example, we're in the year 1560. It tells you the Ottoman Empire
Yeah.
is here. And yeah, so when I teach my history class, this is the major thing that I use. Obviously,
Amazing.
it's not 100%, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then you
It's
can,
good. That's what
when
we
you
want,
go
isn't
from
it?
event to event, you can kind of show like, hey, we went from here to there, and look,
Yeah.
the map
Mm.
changed.
Yeah. So, Sheikh,
Um,
one of the things that I do, and I'm definitely gonna take this and put it on our history group as well. I think this would be a good resource for them to also kind of use as well. One of the things that I always try to do when I'm trying to remember history, and right now might not be a good time for me to try to remember everything, is that I try to remember key events and just kind of pivot my remembrance around these key events. So, obviously, the destruction of Baghdad is like a key kind of pivot event.
yeah.
So I work around that. So like my brain is this was very hard for me to kind of, because we've got Hijri dates and we've got the Gregorian. My brain, naturally, I wanted it to work around Hijri because I want to see what's going on in the scholarly world. So I'm pivoting my whole brain around, okay, what's happening? So I know we can say 1256, but in my 1258, but in my mind, I'm thinking 656. 656 is more important to me than 1258. I can always
Mm.
do the 650, 630 type of thing, but I want to look at, because I'm very much into death dates of scholars. So I'll give you a good example. I'm thinking, for example, like 656. If I know in my mind Mongols are still in control at that point, I know in terms of trajectory, because this can happen. And I'm still a student, very much a student of history. I'm thinking at this point, okay, what are the Ottomans doing? Ottomans can't even be alive because it's like it's the Mongols are still there. So I'm thinking, okay, right, what was the next date that was very, very important? And I'm linking it to scholars' death dates as well. So I know, for example, I know Ibn al-Humam, rahimahullah ta'ala, was alive probably when the Fath of Qustantiniya happened. At the same time, I know Ibn Hajar wasn't alive. So I know Ibn Hajar passed away at 852. I know Ibn Humam passed away at 861. So even though I don't remember exactly the date of the Fath of Qustantiniya, I know it was somewhere, it was probably about 857-ish or around about that period. So
You have a hadith background, don't you?
yes, so that does
I can
help.
tell. Yeah.
So if you know your death dates of scholars, you want to work around your history dates around. And so okay, for example, Tamerlane. When did the famous Battle of Ankara happen? Well, I know Ibn Hajar, for example, was alive during that time because he speaks about it and he speaks about how bad. So it's definitely got to be between 700, late 700s to Ibn Hajar's death date, which is 852. So I know it's about 800 Hijri because it's around about that period wherein the Ottoman Empire is really growing and it's just starting to get off. Okay, then we come to like, okay, what about night? So that's the best way I would learn history. If you're into like, for alim, for ulama, I would say that's a good way. Not for everyone, but for ulama. For ulama, because you're going to go with Hijri centuries, just ask yourself who are the key scholars. For example, even when I think of 900 Hijri, now I know the Ottoman Empire is like is booming, and now Sultan Suleiman and all of these scholars are all of these sultans are coming in. Okay, at what point do they now take over the Mamluks? So, okay, I know Ibn Nujaym was alive. He was alive and he had to live through a period wherein he's living under Ottoman control of Egypt. So he passed away in 970. So it's just before his period. Now, I also know that there was a scholar by the name of Ibrahim al-Halabi who travels from Halab, from Aleppo, and he gets to Egypt. And at that time, you could say there's the conquest of Egypt happening by the Ottomans. So I know that's about 940. So I know then, therefore, that it's around about 932 or something that the Ottomans take over Egypt. So you don't always need to get the dates 100% right, but you need to have a kind of overall
See, I
picture
don't think
that
the
helps.
students can appreciate this that much, but I appreciate it. Because I
Mm.
think for an average person, the political history and the not history of knowledge, well, first of all, the history of knowledge is non-existent. But if it's there, it's really hard to, it'd be really interesting to make like a tool like Cronus,
Hmm.
except with in Islamic sense,
Ulama.
where yeah, you're like, okay, at this
Yeah,
point, what's
that
who
would
are
be
the rulers and
amazing.
who are the key.
That so that's one of the features of inshallah ta'ala, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, unless someone beats me to it, which
I
is the
mean,
Hanafi book.
as far as the students know, I said it first on the conversation today. I'm messing with you.
No,
Go ahead.
so 100%. But so in the Hanafi book, this is something that I think my Hanafi book is quite unique in. Obviously, I'm just promoting the book more just so that people also are aware that
And
this
what's
is
the name of the
something.
book and where can we get it?
So an introduction to the Hanafi Madhhab, Volume 1. And inshallah ta'ala, we hope to have it out by October, November latest. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala. We just need du'as that, the last few
No.
stages of editing, we get it done, inshallah. But this is one of the unique features that I don't just go through history. I try to connect it to those parts of the history that is relevant to us as ulama. So what's happening in the ulama world and I find that very interesting. For example, I've spoken a little bit about the meeting of Ibn Khaldun and Tamerlane, which I know historians speak about it as well. But for us, it's like we can actually read these books where Ibn Khaldun has a
Yeah.
whole full conversation with Tamerlane. And then I'm speaking, I'm
Even
thinking about
Batuta has one with who was it?
the Delhi, the
Yeah,
Tughlaq, I think.
yeah,
Firoz Shah
yeah.
Tughlaq was one of them. Yeah, Muhammad Tughlaq, Muhammad bin Tughlaq.
Was it
And
Muhammad
he
bin
say,
Tughlaq?
I
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah,
I think so. And he
but he was
says
very like
he was,
in the beginning,
yeah,
like yeah. So I went through the
yeah,
Ibn Batuta's one,
yeah.
and
He gets a bit scared of him at the end. He just pegs it because he's getting a bit out of control, Ibn Muhammad bin Tughlaq. But it's like and those are the things that interest me. Like I get the whole battles and which the Ottomans had this cannon and that kind of that stuff is fun as well. Don't get me wrong. But for me, it's like, okay, so that's where I really find the Mughals a bit hard, to be honest with you, because it's like it's hard with the Ottomans. It's brilliant, Sheikhul Islams, and I can trace all the Sheikhul Islams properly. And Mullah Khusro, like for example, for me, I'm thinking, okay, Mullah Khusro, the author of Durarul Hukam, which is a very important book in the Hanafi Madhhab. He was the ustad of Muhammad al-Fatih, to the extent where Muhammad al-Fatih actually says, هذا أبو حنيفة زماننا. Maybe he said in Turkish or Arabic, Allah knows best, but he said this is the Abu Hanifa of our time. When he conquered Constantinople, he actually honors Mullah Khusru. So for me, that's just like, that's the stuff I want to read about. That
Yeah.
interests me. I guess everyone's got their own interest when it comes to
Like one
history.
example, I think with the Mughals is Sheikh Nizamuddin Awliya. Maybe that's before, but like you can literally read his majlises. There's a book where the
Mm,
guy is explaining his majlises, and it's very much like a normal,
yeah.
like a normal Sufi majlis.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
incredible. Like even stuff like what interests me is stuff like, for example, this is something I've got in the book. I've got it in Al-Aini's biography. He was very close to Sultan Ashraf Barsbay of the Mamluks. So then after Tamerlane's son, I think Shah Rukh or something, he wants to, and this is interesting stuff because it's the type of stuff we have today going on. He wants to send a cloak to clothe the Kaaba, right? Like a what's it called? What do they call it? SubhanAllah, I always forget some basic terminology
the
sometimes.
Ghilaf, right?
The Ghilaf, apologies. The Ghilaf of the Kaaba. So, but like that
Yeah, I
would
don't think we can trust this guy anymore. Doesn't know the word Ghilaf.
so he wants to put the Ghilaf on the Kaaba, but it's almost a sense of is he trying to stamp his authority? That's what the Mamluks are worried about. That he who puts his Ghilaf on the Kaaba maybe controls the Kaaba. Is that type of? So now he asks Al-Aini, what should we say? So Al-Aini says, on what does Shah Rukh say? Because he's apparently he's a Muslim, like Tamerlane claimed to be a Muslim. Allah knows best, right? Um, so he says, I made another that I'll do it, and that's why I need to fulfill my nadar is wajib. So he asks Al-Aini, and Al-Aini gives the answer, and he says, and this is all in Al-Aini's biography. This is all mentioned. So this is for me. It's like the next time I'm reading Al-Binaya, it's like I'm not just reading. Like, whoa, this guy was close to the Mamluk Sultan. This is a human being. So I like to even Abu Bakr Ali ibn Abi Bakr al-Marghinani, his Ustad Sadr al-Shahid, the way he passed away in the Battle of Qatwan. Like it's an emotional story. You think to yourself, okay, that must have impacted Sahib al-Hidayah as well. Let's see al-Hidayah if we see any references when it comes to Kitab al-Sir. Does he speak about any of, is it having an impact on it? Because sometimes what happens when we read the fiqh books, it becomes very dry. We forget these are people who are living through history, and they were part. So, for example, Nasafi. This
Mhm.
is something that interested me. For example, the author of Kanz al-Daqa'iq, he's probably writing at a time where in the Mongols, because he passed away 710, either 710 or 701. It's one of the two. I mean, this is peak Mongol time in the sense that Mongols are still in that control and Ilkhanate and everything's still there. And then you find out, okay, these little pockets of these little dynasties that started opening up within the even Ilkhanate and within the actual Mongols. And then you read Kanzu Daqaiq and you see at the start, and he's saying Ma'ama bi min al-awaiq. So you could probably see, okay, right, hold on. He's probably talking about having to move, and then even Sadr Shahid, Sadr Sharia, and all of these authors of the Sharh al-Wiqaya genre, al-Wiqaya, Sharh al-Wiqaya, even them, they had to move, the whole family had to move to Kirman because the
Wow.
Mongols had come. So this is really interesting. Like, for example, right now, I've just bought a book of Al-Muttaqin, which I hope to advertise because I think these are the things which I love. It's called the Alu Qudamah was Salah. So this was the whole Qudama family that moved from Palestine to Damascus because of the Crusades. So that has an impact now on society because now you'll see a lot more interaction between Asha'ira and the Hanabila in Baghdad and Damascus and all of these places. Now you'll see it's kind of like laying down the foundations of what will later happen between Ibn Taymiyyah and Taqiyuddin as-Subki and all of these scholars because of the fact that there's these Hanabila that are moving from Palestine because of the Crusades. So historical events are affecting our ilm, and there's no denying that, and that's very important to appreciate.
It'd be nice to have a course on this. I want to say one last thing, and I think we should end it because we're much over
No
time.
problem, sure.
One interesting thing I found is you know how you're talking about how there was this period of all these books being written in Transoxiana.
Mhm.
You know how in the Hanafi fiqh books when they talk about what are the excuses for you to miss Jama'ah, and one of them is like, oh, this, and then they say, oh, if it's slippery, if it's like muddy,
Oh, yeah.
and that would
Hmm.
like throw me off.
Okay.
Then I was reading about World War II, and what you find is because in that area in Russia, the muddy season is this horrible season. It's called the Rasputitsa.
Wow.
And that actually blocked Hitler. It messed up Hitler's plan because he didn't
Crazy.
factor how
Yeah.
bad the muddy season was.
Yeah.
So it kind of like made me connect back to
Crazy.
our fiqh books because I was like, because like the other excuses
Yeah,
seem
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
much more severe. And all of a sudden they're
Subhanallah.
like, oh, it's muddy. And you're like, okay,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
100%.
muddy.
That's brilliant. So those are the type of things where we really need to, and it's only us that can do it, unfortunately, because the historians are not going to get interested in this type of thing. You're not going to see, like, I always joke with students, you're not going to see Shaykh writing a book on the Masail of Wudu. And you understand? He might write it from a perspective of how they were made up by the Muslim
Yeah.
scholars, but he's not going to write about. But for us, it's like, okay, where did this fiqh mas'ala come from? Could this be to do with their timings? And I actually believe this, that every Urdu fatwa that we have, even from the Deobandi Akabirin as well, I believe every single one, I've said this to students, that try to take one full chapter from a book from even Sheikh Ashraf Ali Thanwi or whoever in Imdadul Fatawa, and go through the full bab and try to connect it to their urf. And I think you'll come up with something. You'll see, okay, maybe this is connected to India. Maybe this is connected to this. And I think that can happen even if you take something like Fatawa Mahmudiyya, even as late as even Ahsanul Fatawa. I think you will see some elements in there that, okay, I think this was to do with this is what was happening in India, and maybe this is why Hazrat Tanvi is talking like this, or Shaykh al-Islam Mullah Hussain Ahmed Madani is writing it like this because of this reason. All of the other fatwa, even to the extent even fatwa Darum Zakaria, because I know you come from Darum
I
Zakaria
mean,
and you're graduate.
you're being recorded right now. I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
no, I'm just saying,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, I
I
agree.
mean
I
it,
agree, of
I
course.
mean it in a praise way. Like, how many of those fatwa could be something? This is something in South Africa. There's something in South Africa about this which Hazrat's trying to address with this fatwa, or maybe even if you don't see it, it'll be there, but you need to
No, no,
pick it up.
of
And
course,
that's why it's
definitely.
so important to be aware of, like, history, to culture, like what you just said, aware of what was going on in that time, and to kind of become that fly on the wall type of idea where you just go back in time and see how can I make sense of what this fatwa was doing. And sometimes you can't, sometimes you can. That's just the part
Of
of it,
course. Shaykh, Jazakallah khair for being here.
I mean,
I'll give you a quick call afterwards just to kind of wrap up.
absolutely.
But thank you so much. Can the students also say Jazakallah? I think we had a lot of people who signed up, but I guess they're expecting the video,
No,
which
no problem at all, Sheikh.
as
Even
Lubab, we don't like that, by the way. But
yeah, that's fine.
Jazakallah khair for being here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It was really nice. It was really nice.
Alhamdulillah.
Jazakallah
Alhamdulillah.
khair.
My pleasure, Sheikh, and Jazakallah for having me. And
All
inshallah
right.
ta'ala,
Assalamu
anytime,
alaikum wa
inshallah.
rahmatullahi
Keep
wa
us in your
barakatuh.
du'as, inshallah. Assalamu
You as
alaikum.
well.